Welcome to the Sleep Haunt. Tonight, the highway stretches far into the dark, carrying 9 true disturbing trucker horror stories, tales gathered from lonely rest stops, deserted fuel stations, and endless miles where the night seems to breathe. These stories move slowly, quietly, and linger long after the engine falls silent. Stay with me until the final mile, where each story connects like headlights fading one by one into the horizon. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits out there in the dark. Share your city and the time you're listening in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and like our video, your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Story number 1. The interstate was straight as a ruled line through the flat land, and the rig rode it like a slow river. Mason had hauled freight long enough to know when a night was going to be easy. The air was clear, the crosswind was steady, the trailer was sealed clean and tight. He had thermos coffee that still felt warm between his palms, and a playlist that worked like a pendulum on his thoughts. It was the kind of night when a person could believe in simple things: fuel, distance, sleep, waiting at the end. After midnight, the road took on the private quiet of an empty hallway. The exit signs thinned. Farmhouses were dark islands far off to either side, their porch lights cupped in their hands. Now and then a car would pass, a brief aquarium of faces, then slip ahead into the dark where the lanes made room. Mason watched the reflectors flicker by and let the cruise hold him steady. He didn't use the CB much anymore. Most didn't. It still sat under the dash, red digits glowing like a small ember, out of habit more than anything else. At mile 134, the fog began as a thought before it became a sight. The world ahead went soft, the shoulder grass faded. The sky had no stars. Mason lined up on the center of his lane and eased off a fraction. The wipers flicked dry across glass that wasn't wet, more of a gesture than a need. He felt the fine hairs on his forearms wake up one by one, like someone had rubbed a balloon on the air. "Breaker 19, crackled the CB, plain as an old greeting. He glanced at it without touching. The volume was low. The channel was dead. The voice was a man's, confident and calm, older than the electronics. It carried with it a sense of someone leaning on a counter, talking like a favor wasn't being asked so much as offered. "Breaker 19, Mason, you copy?" He had not shared his name. No one on the net knew his voice. He hadn't keyed the mic in hours. He watched the fog lick at the edges of his lights, and tried not to smile, and tried not to frown. The world had small surprises. All of them could be harmless. He reached slowly and clicked the mic. "Go ahead. You run this route often," the man said, like the weather. "Keep to the right when you see a mile marker you think you already passed." Mason glanced at the glowing digits of the dash clock. It read 2:17. He didn't answer. He listened. "Don't take the long left," the voice added, as if pointing to directions on a napkin. The long left isn't there. The fog was a steady field of milk now, and the small white posts at the shoulder gleamed and were gone. Gleamed and were gone. Mason looked for the next mile marker and saw 135 slide past. A minute later, his headlights touched another green sign. It was 135 again. He felt the small lift of his chest, like the road had stepped one stair down. He didn't move his hands. He softened his feet on the pedals. He stayed in the right lane just because someone had said to do it kindly. The long left arrived like a choice. The lanes ran straight, but shadow pressed like a thumb sideways, and a gentle curve opened where it shouldn't. The paint on the pavement was unhelpful. The fog made a lit room out of the windshield, the kind that keeps all the walls near. If Mason had been tired enough, or proud enough, he might have taken the bend without thinking about it. The trailer hummed behind him, patient and heavy. He kept to the line, right where he was, and the long left drifted away, as if it were the reflection of a turn on a window. "You're good," the CB said softly. "You're good." He didn't ask who the man was. He didn't ask how his name had fit so neatly into another person's mouth. The road offered odd shapes, and if you looked at them from the right angle, they became normal enough. He watched for more numbers. 136 came, and then another 136, and then a stretch where there were no signs at all. Lights twinkled ahead, low and stable, and he felt the relief of a station. It was a way house. The overheads glowed pale. The building sat quiet as a Sunday school. No trucks idled in line. The fog pooled around the posts and lifted in slow curls like breath from a sleeping person. He didn't have to stop. The scale was closed. But the open sign, for some reason, clicked on just as his front bumper reached the painted arrow. It wasn't a trap. It wasn't even a demand. It felt like an invitation kept out at arm's length. He eased off at 5 miles per hour. The concrete pad came under him. And for a second he felt something old. As if another rig, another weight, was there too, stacked in time like pages pressed in a book. The screen on his dash beeped, just once, a perfect little square of sound. The printer at the weighhouse chirped alive and fed out a strip of paper. Mason watched it through the window. It fluttered and then stopped, a small white tail and a quiet metal mouth. No one came to take it. No one was inside. He could see the chairs. One had a jacket on it. A coffee cup waited on the counter, half full, untroubled by steam. "You can take it," the radio said, the voice patient as a toll booth worker in a town where no one ever ran the gate. He parked, careful and square, and set the brake. The fog felt thicker when he stepped down, like stepping onto a carpet. The cold was clean and empty. Gravel under his boots made civilized clicks. He opened the door to the weighhouse and felt warm air brush his face. The heater still worked. The lights buzzed softly. He took the ticket from the printer because it was the kind of thing a person did to show the world he was real in it. The paper had a weight printed on it that made sense for his load. Under that, a timestamp, January. Not this year's January. A January that would have put him in high school. Sitting low in his seat. Under the date was a note in the margin that a printer does not make. Drive on. Mason stood there a moment, the paper aligned in his fingers perfectly, like a blade aligned in a sheath. The jacket on the chair was denim, old enough to look like it had learned the building's shape. The coffee had a skin where the air had touched it. The wall behind the counter had a corkboard with notes pinned in tidy rows. Phone numbers and flyers for swap meets and church suppers in towns he'd heard of, crossed diagonally across all of it. A black ribbon pinned a photo. 3 rigs parked side by side at an angle, their noses proud. The middle one had his company's logo, only the colors were wrong. A man stood in front of it, hat tilted back, grinning like the thrill was new. The caption in thin pen under the glossy edge read, "First night on the new bridge." He set the ticket in his jacket pocket because there was no trash can nearby, and because throwing it away felt like talking too loud in a place that wasn't his. Then he went back into the fog. The scale lights hummed, bored, and the fog hummed back. The radio was quiet until he was back at speed. "When you get where the land falls into the river," the voice said, "keep the center line to your door. Folks drift left there. They always have. It always looks like the road gets bigger. It doesn't." Mason nodded as if the radio could see. The fog thinned, then thickened. Then let the sky show one high star, and then took it back. Songs on his playlist seemed to choose themselves now, softer ones with walking tempo and leaves in them. The clock on the dash stayed at 2:17 a little longer than it should have, like it had decided to sit with a friend. He tapped it with a knuckle and watched the minute turn. He felt awake enough to notice small things. He felt tired enough to accept them all without wrestling. Headlights glowed in his mirror, small and disciplined, and stayed. They were not aggressive. They kept a respectful distance that changed when he changed. He tried a little speed up. They did too. He eased back. They mirrored it. There was a steadiness there that belonged to someone who had driven long enough to know courtesy. But when the road straightened, and the fog lightened, and a truck should have been visible as a set of lines and corners, there was not enough shape. It was only lights, no grille, no chrome, no shadows to define it. The glass of his mirror made an easy place for a kind presence to live. And he decided to let it. They reached the river by degrees. The soft hint of slower air. The smell of water like a curtain someone just pulled out of a cedar closet. The sound of his tires change. As the density of the night shifted. Ahead, the bridge rose gently, not a high arch, just enough of a lift that a person felt it in their stomach. Signs warned about gusts. But the night had settled down. The rails were newly painted. The bolts held the light as if light was a fine thing and worth holding. To the left, a wide shadow suggested a side road, graceful and inviting, curving away as if the bridge offered a polite alternative. It wasn't there. The centerline at Mason's door did what centerlines do. He kept it steady, like holding a sleeping child. The trailer tracked. The steady lights in his mirror hummed closer, then backed off, a conversation between drivers that didn't need words. On the other side of the bridge, the fog gave up all at once. The sky opened, a deep dark that was not empty. The road ran unembarrassed. The minute on the clock moved on with a small click. He felt like the night had swiveled and returned his face to itself. He let out a breath he hadn't planned on holding and tasted the faint bitterness of his cooling coffee. The CB crackled again, not loud, but with the crispness of a page turned. "You're past it," the voice said. "You're all right." Mason thumbed the mic. "Past what?" "The old alignment," the man said. "They said it wrong at first. Folks would drift and follow the river out of habit. The new bridge fixed the grade. Still, the night likes to try." He wanted to ask who he was thanking. He wanted to ask where the man was, and whether he had headlights in his mirror and nothing more. Instead, he asked, because it was an honest question, "You on this stretch with me?" "Not the way you are," the man said, and the line went soft as a hand slides out of a handshake. Not to be rude, but to get back to work. He drove on. The fog stayed behind like someone who had walked beside him a while and then turned up a path toward a house with one light in the kitchen. The grass along the shoulder went crisp with frost. A radio tower blinked red, panicky eyes in the distance, only it looked more patient from here. Town names arrived on blue signs and didn't feel like puzzles anymore. He began to think of eggs and toast, of a stool at a counter, of the nice way a place smells when the griddle is first warming up. He saw the diner well before he reached it. It sat by itself, not part of an exit with 15 options, but a single exit with one gift. The sign read plainly, "Bridgeview," yellow letters on a green field. He took the ramp slowly, watched the trailer float like a balloon behind him, and rolled into a lot with lines freshly painted. 2 cars waited, no trucks. The building was low and hugged itself. The windows threw warm rectangles onto the lot. Inside, the bell gave a gentle tap, as if the doorframe were shy. A woman with gray hair put a menu down without looking up from the coffee pot, then looked up and smiled like she had expected him all along. The clock above the grill read 2:17. The minute hand wobbled, thinking about moves it wasn't ready to make. Bacon whispered on the flat top. Mason took a stool. A small radio on a shelf by the pie case murmured a song from the year that didn't match the calendar and somehow suited the coffee. "Long night?" she asked. "Long enough," he said. It felt good to say a small thing. "River's tricky when it fogs," she said. "People follow the hand they've been holding. The hand changes." He nodded and didn't tell her about the scale ticket or the second mile markers or the gentle left that had offered him a ghost of a disaster shaped like kindness. He didn't have to. The pancakes came, and they were perfect. The butter slid and didn't hurry. The syrup was a maple that tasted like a story someone told you in a calm voice when you were small. A man in a booth near the back lifted a hand. He wore denim and a cap, with a company name Mason recognized. Only the font was off, as if it had been decided long ago. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. It was a greeting that said, "In this room, with this night pressed against the glass, there was nothing to be fixed and nothing to be changed." When Mason paid, the woman slid a piece of paper across the counter under his receipt. It was a half sheet, torn on one edge, a copy of a newspaper clipping. He looked down. "New bridge opens ahead of schedule," the headline read. 2 black and white photos, a ribbon, a line of trucks that looked like neat silver dominoes placed carefully in front of each other, a date that matched the one on the way ticket. In the margin, in pen, small neat letters, "Safe Travels." He nodded and folded it, and put it with the other folded thing. He stepped back into the night, and it had not moved. The rig loomed like a patient animal that knew its job and wanted a pat on the shoulder for confirmation. Back on the interstate, the reflection of his marker lights kept him company. The steady pair of headlights reappeared in his mirror, respectful, correct. He considered pulling into the next rest area and letting them pass, giving that unknown driver the lead. but some part of him understood it would not change the order of things. Some nights the road puts one foot in front of the other, using more than one pair of boots. Dawn became a rumor on the east edge of the world. The night's black turned first to blue, and then to the color of a quiet lake. Fields started to show themselves as fields, with furrows like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Outbuildings came back into being. A dog trotted along a fence line and paused to taste the morning. Mason reached in his pocket and felt paper. He didn't look at it. He kept his hands where a driver keeps them. The radio gave one last breath of static that sounded almost like someone clearing their throat to speak and changing their mind. He watched as the headlights in his mirror faded, not because they slowed, but because there was more light than there had been, and they belonged to the dark portion of the night's shift. He let a small mile of gratitude pass through him, unremarked, like a gentle breeze through an open window. He didn't need to make sense of it. He didn't need to tell it to anyone at the next stop in order to keep it real. Some miles you keep, some miles keep you. Just before the sun put its first blade on the horizon, as if someone had cracked an egg on the lip of the world, he saw the shadow of another bridge off to the left across the water, a shape that had been replaced and given back to time. For a heartbeat, all the lights on that empty span blinked red in a polite, synchronized nod. He could have sworn the marker lights on the invisible truck in his mirror answered once, low and friendly, like a hand lifted from a steering wheel, without breaking grip. He drove on, steady, unbothered by the clock, as the interstate regained its familiar daytime face. The white lines neatened. The blue signs bragged about breakfasts and diesel. The world had decided to be ordinary again. He let it. The ticket in his pocket made no sound, and the day, mercifully, did not ask any questions. Story number 2. The plateau rose like a dark ocean stopped mid-surge, and the highway cut a clean seam through it. Night was high and dry, full of stars, the kind that looked close enough to pluck if the window were open. Eliza settled her rig onto the long grade with the easy steadiness of someone who had learned to keep a heavy thing gentle. In the mirrors, the trailer's marker lights lined up like a string of patient glowworms. The air was cool and smelled faintly of sage. Her truck was newer than most, smart enough to talk in polite little chimes when it wanted something. The company called the System Guardian. It watched lanes and faces, monitored distance, whispered about upcoming speed changes as if it were leaning from the passenger seat to offer a reminder before trouble began. She didn't mind it the way some did. It was a second pair of eyes that never blinked. The road was empty enough to feel like a secret. Wind farms turned slowly on the ridges, blades barely visible against the star wash. A steady mechanical breath in a place where everything else held still. A distant radio tower winked red. Eliza had the cruise set just under the posted, a habit that had saved her more than once, and the engine's hum settled into a low, reliable note. Guardian chimed once, a soft tone, then a bright, precise voice. Passenger seat occupant must wear seat belt. Eliza glanced to her right on instinct. The seat was empty, clean, except for a folded jacket and a clipboard tucked upright in the side pocket. The belt fell in a loose loop, the buckle resting like a coin on the cushion. She smiled to herself, not in amusement so much as in respect for a machine doing what it could with what it had. Sometimes the sensor threw a fit at shadows and heavy bags and the way the seat bounced. She reached over with one hand on the wheel and buckled the belt across the empty space. The voice went quiet. The rig returned to its steady inhale and exhale. On the far horizon, lightning flickered miles away, silent at this distance, like a dance seen through glass. The grade steepened by a whisper, and she let the transmission do its work. Rumor had it that goats roamed this stretch at night, nimble as cats, fearless of line paint. She kept an easy eye on the shoulders. The tone came again. Passenger seat occupant must wear seat belt. She looked. The belt she'd just buckled lay latched. The voice didn't repeat. It cleared itself, as if deciding its own mistake wasn't worth arguing about. Eliza flexed her fingers, feeling the steering wheel's texture as something close to company. A gentle side wind pressed once and released. Guardian pinged, a different sound. Crosswind detected. Reduce speed recommended. She obliged out of habit and courtesy, easing off a few miles per hour. A tumbleweed scrolled across the lane ahead, slow and deliberate. As if remembering choreographed steps, the tires thumped it into a small sigh, and it was gone. She crested the long hill and let gravity help her. To the right, a concrete rest area sat shut for renovation, fencing around it like a neat cage. One sodium lamp over the entrance flickered a soft orange and returned to steady. The sign out front had a canvas sleeve laced over it. A handwritten note on plywood hung from the fence. Scenic view closed, no services. Through the gaps, the picnic tables looked like chess pieces left mid-game. Guardian spoke again. Not a chime this time, a new line she hadn't heard. Construction zone ahead. Reduce speed. Watch for personnel. No cones glowed. No signs leaned in the breakdown lane. She scanned the roadside, slow and careful. The asphalt ahead went a shade darker where the crews had milled it and left the lane smoother than the shoulder. The faintest mark of paint, chalk fresh and too small for a car at speed to care about, made hash marks that would have told a worker where to stop a truck half a day earlier. She dropped a few more miles per hour anyway. The night had a feeling like someone holding a door for someone else. Out of the corner of her eye, motion. The passenger side mirror caught a figure where the road bent. A reflection that was nothing more than her own marker lights stretched and odd. She knew better than to chase a ghost with her eyes. She held her line and breathed steady. The air through the vents cooled by a degree. Guardian stayed quiet as if it approved. She passed a call box tucked into the cut rock, one of the old ones that no one used anymore now that phone service had pushed into the canyons. Its little blue light stared with polite determination. As her truck rolled by, the speaker grill gave one dry click, like a throat deciding not to speak after all. The sound was small enough that she might have imagined it. It was the kind of thing this road fed to the mind like breadcrumbs, just to see if the mind would bend to pick them up. The plateau narrowed into a pass, stones shouldering in on both sides. The sky shrank to a long rectangle. Rock faces held stripes where rain had taken the time to draw. The engine brake whispered a reassurance when she feathered it. Meeting lanes here were close enough that a person could glance from cab to cab and see a stranger's elbow on a wheel. Guardian chimed twice in quick succession. Obstacle ahead in 4.2 miles. Reduce speed. Then, as if for a different driver entirely, do not overtake in right lane. Eliza adjusted. It sounded like the system was reading a script from a time when this very stretch had been messy earlier in the day. 4 miles later, the road bent around a scatter of small rocks, the size of loaves that had waited in the shadow for someone less lucky. She moved left by a hand's breadth and avoided them easily. The second line was unnecessary. There was no one to pass, but she felt oddly grateful that something in the cab wanted to keep her patient. The downhill broke into a valley shallow as a breath. Dry grass stood like thin hair on the land. She thought about pulling into the next turnout to look at stars properly for a minute, just long enough for the engine to tick cool. The thought was enough for the exit to present itself. It was a wide gravel place with a simple sign, viewpoint 500 feet. The shoulder widened, and then gave her room like a friend stepping aside in a crowded room. She signaled out of respect to no one, and guided the rig into the turnout. Gravel crunched under the tires in a domestic, comforting way. She set the brake and let the engine idle down to quiet. The night stepped closer, with the vibration gone. Stars arrived in laughter, 100 more than she could count. Clusters layered behind clusters, some low enough that the ridge seemed to wear them like a crown. The cab lights stayed off. She didn't need them. A half-life of glow from dash indicators gave her a gentle geography. Her thermos clicked softly when she unscrewed it. The steam that curled from it smelled like mornings on a porch. Somewhere in the grass below, a small animal hopped once and stopped, thinking its thoughts. Guardian gave a single chime, then spoke in a tone that had nothing to do with external sensors. Driver drowsiness not detected. Good job maintaining alertness. She laughed under her breath, the sound small enough not to break the spell of the place. Thanks, she said into the forward dark, as if the machine minded being thanked. Then came a tone she didn't know. Not a warning, not a notice. Just a soft double tap, like knuckles on a door from someone who didn't want to wake the whole house. Event saved. Cabin video recorded. Her eyes went to the dash camera's tiny icon. A red dot pulsed for half a second and went still. She had not braked hard. She had not changed lanes. She had not yawned. The clip would be 30 seconds long, pinned for review by a logic she couldn't see. She took the thermos out with her and stepped down. The door closed with the weight of a thing that had been well made. Cold climbed into her sleeves. She walked to the guardrail and looked out, a simple act that always adjusted something inside. Far below, a road snaked through the dark, another route that would be full at noon and empty now. A faint scent of creosote soothed the small, anxious animal that lives in every person who keeps hours like these. When she returned to the cab, the passenger belt lay unbuckled. She didn't remember unbuckling it. That didn't mean it hadn't happened. She put her thermos back in its place, clicked the belt into the receiver again, a calm domestic act like a parent covering a sleeping child. Her fingers paused, feeling the seat cushion give under pressure the way cushions do. She pressed a little more, just to make the sensor's mind up for it. The buckle gave the same neat click as before. As she settled behind the wheel, the dash camera's small screen flickered and offered the option to play the recent clip. Curiosity is its own kind of fuel. She pressed the button. The sound came first, the hush of the idling engine, an atmospheric hiss of the night, the small tick of the cooling exhaust. The picture showed her driver's seat from a high angle, a calm figure in a hat looking out the window at stars. And there, in the passenger seat, the belt lay unbuckled in the first frame, and then no movement captured. No scratch of fabric. The belt lay across the cushion, buckled in the next. The system had not caught fingers, fabric, shoulder, nothing. Just a belt that decided to change its state between frames. She let the clip end. The system offered to upload it. She declined. Not everything needed to go into the company cloud where someone bored on a Thursday could suggest she keep the seat free of loose items. The night was too clean to have managers in it. She pulled back onto the highway with the care of someone merging into water. The grade smoothed. The road ahead lifted into another cut between rocks stacked like books. Guardian pinged. Steep descent ahead. Check brakes. As if she would forget. Once, early on, she had, and the lesson still lived in her bones. They came to a temporary stoplight that turned the narrow canyon into a one-way street for a quarter mile. A portable generator hummed beside it like a patient refrigerator. The red lens glowed steady against the stone walls. A figure stood under it in a high-visibility vest, silver stripes bright, a hard hat reflecting stars. He lifted one hand in a slow, flat greeting, without stepping toward the lane. The vest's orange looked a little faded, like something that had been washed many times and left to dry over truck mirrors. Eliza eased to a stop and settled the weight without rocking. The man held up a small sign in both hands. "Wait for green," it said in letters stenciled by someone with good patience. His face was in shade beneath the brim, not hidden, just ordinary and unimportant next to the clarity of the sign. He pointed once at the front of her truck in a gentle motion that said, without voice, "No idling." She shut the engine off out of respect for the request and the quiet. The night pressed in softly, like a blanket settling. In the calm, she heard water managing a trickle down the rocks somewhere out of sight. The wind found the high trees and made a delicate shushing. The man adjusted the sign to his hip and tapped 2 fingers toward her passenger seat. The gesture was so natural it felt like something she had always known to expect. Eliza looked right. The belt lay loose again. She hadn't heard it. Her hand closed the distance and buckled it, the click sounding faint and decisive in the engine-off silence. She lifted a palm toward the flagger. Not a wave, just acknowledgement. He nodded once, just a dip of the helmet, as if he had been waiting to see that one small ritual done right. Then the portable light shifted through a half-amber that belonged more to theater than traffic, and green filled the lens. She started the rig with care, rolled forward past the man, and read the small tape on the hard hat as she went by letters once bright, now peeled at the corners, a highway district number that had been reorganized years back. He held the sign down by his side and looked past her, already preparing to face the empty darkness behind. When she checked her mirror for the expected flick of his vest stripes and her taillights, there was only the red glow on rock. Guardian woke with the engine and spoke in the calm voice she knew. "Single lane ahead. Keep left line visible. Work zone ends in 1,800 feet." The measurement was too precise to be a guess. The odometer rolled through the footage neatly enough that it felt like tracing a chalk mark. On cue, they came out into 2 lanes again. No barrels, no cones, no equipment. The shoulder wore faint scrapes where machines had sat earlier in the day. The rigs that would return at sunrise had left nothing large enough to pinch a tire. Town arrived with little ceremony. A gas station spilled white light up the slope of its roof. The air smelled like rubber and coffee, and the faint twin sweetness of coolant and pastries. Eliza fueled, cleaned the windshield, and let the engine idle just a moment longer than necessary because the familiar tone of it was a kind of thanks. Inside, the counterman slid a receipt across with 2 fingers. He was middle-aged and wore a shirt with the station's name embroidered in a style that had been popular in photos from a decade earlier. He had the careful quiet of someone who has learned what not to say at this hour. "Road clear up there?" he asked, voice low enough not to disturb the calm the lights had built. "Clear enough," she said. It was true. Any night when a person made it to a place with light and coffee, without breaking rhythm, counted as clear. He nodded toward the pass she had come through with his chin. "They've been working that cut all month. Sensors get jumpy when they move the signs, even when the lane's clean. You get any false alarms, don't let it get in your head." She nodded. "It's learning me. Sometimes it remembers somebody else," he said, more to the receipt printer than to her. "Those gizmos keep old patterns like a dog keeps old trails. Folks been through here a long time. Place is soaked in driving." He looked up and surprised her with a small, easy smile. "You take care now. Watch for elk." Back in the cab, she parked at the far end of the lot where the sodium lights didn't reach, and the stars returned. She set the brake, stacked her logbook and the clipboard in their spots, and glanced once more at the passenger seat. The belt lay buckled, neatly in place. She left it like that. The bunk yawned behind her, soft, square, tidy. Outside, a refrigerated unit from a neighboring rig hummed a steady white noise that covered all the rest of the world like a soft rain. She slept without a dream she could bring back. Dawn moved in quietly, gray first, then the pale yellow that makes the edges of things gentler. Birds found the gas station roofline and made it a temporary place of importance. Truck doors closed like punctuation marks. Somewhere a power washer started, and the sound rose and fell. At the distribution center where she undocked hours later, a supervisor slid a clipboard onto the dash with final paperwork to sign and a map of the yard to keep for the turn. She saw it then beneath the paperwork, a laminated card that must have slipped between the seat and the console when the truck was new. It had the company's old logo at the top, and a list of gentle rules in bullet points, the words chosen by someone who knew about people as much as they knew about trucks. Look far ahead. Talk yourself calm at every bend. Never hurry in narrow places. If you feel watched, drive like the watcher is someone you trust. Do not change lanes on a blind crest. Belt every seat. Empty seats count too. In work zones, keep one pace, and keep it kind. On the back, faint under the laminate, a name in pen had half faded. "I'll ride with you, if you'll ride with me. J.W." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a promise. It felt like a tradition written down by someone who had found the right tone. She slipped the card into her logbook and put the book in its place, a place that now felt obvious. When she settled back behind the wheel to ease into the next gate, Guardian made a single contented chime and said nothing at all about the passenger seat. The belt lay buckled, patient as a folded hand. She checked her mirrors, looked far ahead, and let the truck move the way a great animal moves when it's content, sure, steady, certain of the ground. On the way out of the yard, the highway rose to meet her like it always did, impartial and ready. The wind farms turned. The sky slept or woke according to its own reasons. She held a pace that kept everything quiet. The system at her shoulder, and whatever else might ride there, watched the same night ahead, the same curves and cuts and distances, but the hands on the wheel were hers, and they were good. Story number 3. The prairie kept its own kind of hush. The night was broad, the fields cut down to stubble that made the land look brushed smooth in one direction. Darius let the interstate pull a patient line beneath him. The rig moved like a steady breath. To his left, distant farm silos broke the horizon like chess pieces. To his right, a farmhouse porch light held back a circle of darkness, and nothing more. He carried produce bound for a distribution center 300 miles ahead, a load that didn't mind being rocked but preferred not to be. Surprised. The radio played soft old songs that kept the cab human without demanding anything from him. A wind that had spent all day learning to be polite traced the trailer's side and moved on. Stars hung low enough to feel immediate. He had coffee he'd made right and a thermos lid that didn't leak. The night, in other words, was making an honest effort. The dynamic message board appeared like a sunflower that had forgotten it was daytime. Its amber bulbs blinked into words so clean they felt like a person speaking clearly into a microphone. Incident ahead. All traffic exit 62. A. Detour. The board repeated itself, and then showed a marching arrow that seemed sure of its own optimism. Darius eased off the cruise and glanced at the traffic app he used to gauge how the world was feeling. The map showed a smear of yellow followed by red a dozen miles up, no details yet. He couldn't see any brake lights on the horizon, but distance tricked even careful eyes at night. A mile later, a second board backed the first. Right lane closed. Use alt route. It had the same crisp letters. The shoulder was clean. No early debris. No smoky smell of overheated brakes. None of the low-level chaos that sometimes precedes a full stop. He put on his blinker and took 62 amperes out of habit, like obeying a courteous request. Orange diamond stood where the ramp flattened out. Detour with a black arrow pointing left, sandbags holding the base like little paws. He followed it down a county highway that bled off the interstate's light and kept its own dimmer set to reasonable. The night changed temperature by a few degrees. Cornfields, harvested weeks ago, held their pattern like a sleeping animal that dreams of running. A church steeple drifted past, white in his headlights, and then gone. The first arrow pointed him right. The second one, a mile later, told him to continue straight. The asphalt grew narrower. Not dangerous narrow, just the kind made by people who knew each other's names. He rolled past a grain elevator that slept like an upright ship. The only moving thing was a paper cup under his own draft. He turned the CB on because it was the kind of night that wanted another ear open. He kept it low. Channel 19 was a long, empty hallway. Static moved like dry wind. He was almost relieved by the small companionship of a noise that didn't need to mean anything. The voice came through clean and soft. A woman's, recorded rather than live, the tone of a professional reading words she'd practiced. Attention detour traffic. Continue on County 4 for 2 miles. Turn left at Wren Road. Follow arrows. Avoid freeway until mile marker 202. Darius looked at the CB like it had joined the message boards in deciding his route. He had never heard a detour played over the open band before. He reached to switch channels to see if it was a bleed from something official. The voice returned on 17, quieter, then again on 21, a fraction out of sync, like echoes in a canyon. He went back to 19 and left it, more curious than alarmed. He drove steady. County 4 drifted through a small place that wasn't a town so much as an agreement to put houses near each other. The corner store's sign said open in red neon, but the inside was dark. Someone had forgotten to flip the switch. The third orange arrow at the edge of the place pointed him left. Wren Road. Narrow. He took it. It held him. "What are we doing out here?" he asked the dash in a low voice, a driver's private habit that organizes thoughts. The rig gave its wet shoe squeak as the suspension changed its mind over a patch of uneven pavement and then settled. He kept one eye on the tree line. Deer didn't read signs. The detour arrows were newer than the fence post they leaned against. Their corners were sharp. The sandbags were too clean for long exposure. He watched for a wrong height sign, for a weight limit, for the one little surprise that can turn a calm night into a story. Guardian angels are nice, he thought, but he preferred documented clearances. The CB voice returned after exactly 3 minutes. Attention detour traffic. Left turn ahead in 0.5 miles. Prepare to stop. Bridge out. His GPS showed a stub of river ahead, a slow, polite body of water used to ducks, and a low concrete overpass. The map offered no construction. Apps lag. He slowed anyway. The road sloped, then rose slightly toward a one-lane bridge, with wooden rails silvered from years of weather. The detour arrow at the near end was set for a left into a lane hardly wide enough for a pickup. He stopped 50 feet early, hazard lights blinking in the dark like a patient heartbeat. He got out. Cold breathed at his wrists. Gravel crackled under boots. The wooden rail at the bridge stood firm and unbroken. A plastic sign on a sawhorse, "Bridge closed," had been set with care at the far end. No gouges on it from bumpers, no scuffs, no tire marks. The paint stripes on the deck were a little faded but true. He walked to the left lane the sign wanted him to take. It narrowed to a low underpass beneath a railroad trestle, with a clearance of 12 feet 4 inches painted in heavy black numerals. His trailer sat at 13 feet 6 inches like every honest trailer he had ever hauled. He stood in the light of his own headlights, letting the facts line up. The arrow pointed him toward a choice that was not a choice. He reached out and touched the detour sign, a ridiculous small gesture as if it might change its mind. The vinyl flexed under his fingers, cool and sure of itself. The sandbags holding it made a soft, grinding hum against the asphalt when he shifted it 3 degrees. He looked behind it. On the back, someone had written in black marker a list of dates and a single word next to each. Flood, parade, spray, drill. Last year, all of them. He moved the sign aside with the care he'd use lifting a sleeping child to put it into bed. Then he walked the bridge to its far end. The wood creaked like a porch. The sawhorse across the way had a little battery-powered flasher on it that didn't flash. The batteries had been pulled. The river talked to itself in a steady whisper. Back in the cab, the recorded voice came through again. Left turn required. The tone strained toward firm, the way a GPS gets firm when a driver hesitates. He turned his CB volume lower and sat a breath longer. He had time. For a while yet, the cold kind of night that keeps attention fresh had his back. He went straight across the bridge. The deck held as if happy someone remembered it. On the far side, tire tracks in the frost showed the curve of heavy vehicles that had come across before him. That helped. He followed the arc. The next orange sign was set at an angle that suggested wind more than a plan. He adjusted for it and kept the steady pace that makes a rig feel like a well-read book. At the next intersection, 2 orange diamonds pointed in opposite directions. One read, detour with an arrow right. The other, detour with an arrow left. The bases weren't spiked into the ground. They perched on their sandbags as if ready to attend any conversation. The radio voice offered its opinion. Turn right. It was the same cadence and the same woman, unchanged, a recorded softness. Like a language lesson's patient instructor, Darius put the rig in neutral and set the brake. He stepped down again and listened. Somewhere in the field, a pivot irrigation rig ticked once, a metronome at rest between songs. A barn owl described a quiet white half circle over the ditch, a hooded thought come and gone. The county road signs wore their reflective coatings like shy jewelry. A half-empty soda can he hadn't noticed earlier rolled with an air he didn't enjoy, pushing along the shoulder, moving only when the wind moved. On the back of one of the detour diamonds, stenciled in faint gray, he found a state maintenance yard number and a phone. He dialed it on his cell, knowing full well what would happen. A recording offered office hours ending at 5 in the afternoon. He hung up and put the phone face down, a way of politely closing a door. He looked at the pavement itself for advice and found it. Convoys leave language. The black tar patches at the corners held the faint lines of trailers cutting close. Shoulder gravel had been pushed aside by weight in a way that looked recent enough to still be a lie a week from now. He chose to follow the direction with heavier marks. Left. He drove until the night wrote him a lark. Little test. The road ran past a closed station. Single pump, the glass clean, and the inside swept. The payphone on the side wall had a bulb inside its hood that still worked. A soft circle of light that made the air under it look like a small stage. As his rig approached, the phone rang. It rang with an old-fashioned honesty that had nothing to do with caller ID and everything to do with bells hitting bells. 3 rings and stop. 2 rings and stop. 1 long ring, like a long breath in the dark. He eased off the throttle. He could have driven on. He didn't. He pulled in and stopped. Engine idled low, and stepped out. The phone rang again, not in a hurry. He picked it up because sometimes you make small peace with a place simply by interacting with what it offers. The line carried a faint hum like a distant transformer, and then the same woman from the CB, the same reading voice, the same smooth pace. Detour continues in 0.7 miles. Use caution. Bridge out. He said nothing. There was no prompt to speak. The voice ended, and a click finished the line like a punctuation mark written by a machine with good manners. He let the receiver hang back on its cradle and stood there a moment, looking at his own reflection in the payphone's little metal panel. a shadow of a person with a cap, and the kind of posture that had learned to be the hinge rather than the door. Back in the lane, the road rose slightly. Ahead, white light bloomed in a way that looked like real work balloons, the kind used to create day at night, cooling towers, the suggestion of a crane's arm. Darius felt the small curl of worry fold into his ribs and sit. He slowed. The light was too steady. No generator noise drifted. No diesel rumbled. No glow washed the underside of clouds. The world ahead was illuminated, as if someone had painted it brighter, not lit it. He stopped a full car length before the first barrier, because stopping early is a form of respect. The arrow board at the head of the work looked good. It pulsed a left chevron, then a straight arrow, indecisive or maybe inclusive. He watched it carefully. The bulbs were too dim at the corners and too clean in the center, more of a screen than individual lights. When the breeze moved, the arrow shimmered slightly, not the way a real bulb glints, but the way a cheap television does when someone walks by it with a phone in their pocket. The sawhorses wore fresh reflective tape. There were no muddy boot tracks around them. He turned the engine off because it was the right way to hear whatever needed saying. The dark pressed in with discipline. Frog spoke where the light didn't reach. Something small did the small animal thing of changing its mind and going back the way it came. He opened his door and slid down again, closed it carefully so the hinge wouldn't be asked to be more than metal. At the base of the arrow board stand, he found a battery, a sealed brick with a handle. The cable feeding the board's legs lay on top, not connected. The board should not have been alive. He leaned down and listened. No hiss, no hum. He stood and looked through the glare to where heavy equipment should stand if crews were working here. Nothing. The field past the barricade had the unloved look of a place left fallow by choice. He returned to the cab. The CB voice tried one more time with a slight lag, like it had tripped on its own tape. Turn left now. He reached for the volume and slid it down. Quiet is a tool. He drove forward, steered around the false brightness, and followed the plain reality of the road cutting through the field. The light fell away like a dream that refuses to follow you into morning. A proper blockade met him a mile later. A trooper's cruiser angled across the lane, hazard lights purposeful and kind. Flares whitened the air near the shoulder and painted the road edges in warm beats. A real arrow board on a trailer stood with the dignity of a machine set to a job, power lines properly clipped, generator thrumming a bass note. The trooper waited by the driver's side door, cap low, winter coat zipped up in a way that made his arms move like a deliberate person's. Darius rolled down the glass. The cold came in with the smell of extinguished flares. The trooper's face was the kind you'd describe as composed. Evening, the trooper said. Where you coming from? Darius told him the route, pointed back over his shoulder at Wren Road and a church steeple somewhere behind the trees. The trooper's mouth pressed into a situation line. You followed the bad detour. Not quite a question. There were signs all the way, Darius said. Boards. A voice on 19. We've been trying to pull those for weeks. The trooper scratched the edge of his glove thoughtfully, careful not to scratch his face with it. We get them all, more pop up. Somebody out there keeps setting last year's flood detour back up like it's helpful. They move them around, but the routes don't fit the route anymore. We chased a pickup yesterday and lost the taillights in the slough. And that voice, nobody's owning that voice. Dispatch didn't put anything on 19, we asked. Folks keep saying it's the lady. The payphone rang, Darius said, because if he didn't say it now, it would not get said, and then it would grow and get wrong inside him. The trooper nodded slowly like Darius had described an ordinary thing, like pulling into a station to ask for air. Station out by the elevator? We pulled the line for that last winter. Still rings. The landline ends at a junction we can't get under without digging a farmer's field. Nobody wants to do that in planting season. Nobody wants to do it when the ground is too cold to put back right. He looked past Darius's shoulder to the empty road behind, as if he expected to see someone sensible pulling the signs up by hand and stacking them at the corner for the morning crew. Follow me, he said. I can run you to the proper return. We opened the interstate 3 miles up. A semi hit a mattress and tried to make it a lifestyle for a minute. They're sweeping foam now. No one's hurt. They moved with the trooper ahead, hazard lights like a necklace of caution. The correct detour had the look of something done by a person whose work had their name on it, cones with stripes that matched, fresh chalk on the corners, one real flagger, tired-eyed and friendly, who lifted a hand without drama. The ramp back up to the interstate waited under the familiar smell of warm concrete that spent its days full of Sunday. As Darius took the ramp, a portable message board up on the shoulder lit briefly and spilled out a single phrase in pale dots. Detour cleared. The bulbs were weak, as if starved. They blinked once more and cut to black. He heard a thump like a bass drum at the rear of his trailer as he straightened out. He eased over to the shoulder just past the merge where the guardrail ended and set his brake. In his taillight's red wash, an orange diamond leaned against the bumper. Caught by a short bungee someone had hooked into the ICC bar sometime in the last hour, a hitchhiker of a sign, detour with a left arrow. On the back, in pencil, faint under grime, and the texture of vinyl, someone had written, "Not for night." He unclipped it and carried it to the cruiser. The troopers stowed it in the trunk, along with two others that looked like they had told their last fib. Neither of them said anything more about the payphone. Neither of them said anything at all about the arrow board that had glowed on a dead battery. The night didn't need the discussion. It had records of its own. Back on the main line, the interstate looked like a newly made bed. Clean lanes. The faint shadow where debris had been. A maintenance truck's taillights shrinking into continuity. He set his speed, checked his mirrors, checking not for lights that didn't attach to a vehicle so much as for the feeling that something intended to control the path he took. Nothing leaned on him now. The CB sat the way a faithful appliance sits after a confusing hour, quiet and ready. At the next service plaza, he rolled in and joined 3 trucks tucked neatly under the sodium lamps like animals sharing a barn. He fueled, then took a walk around the rig with the patient calm that erases evenings and starts fresh ones. Tires looked like they were thinking about the future. The load was still strapped and content. Inside, he wrote a small line on the index, card he kept clipped at the dash where notes go to become decisions. When in doubt, follow the ground. He drank water, like advice tastes. He watched the night move across the lot. With its usual soft ambition, the CB popped once, the sound a little like a record settling under a needle. Then, in the kindest possible tone, the woman's voice offered one last line with no urgency in it at all, a bookend spoken just for the sake of symmetry. Return to route, acknowledged. After that, only the long, a good hush of a highway that had gotten whatever had been bothering it out of its system for the time being. He took the ramp, joined the steady handful of red and white lights, and went on. Story number 4. The desert in late autumn rests like a held breath. Highway lights are rare out here, and the road writes a dark line across low scrub and pale rock. Owen kept his rig in the right lane, the kind of measured pace earned by years of hauling loads that dislike surprises. The trailer's marker lights blinked in a friendly cadence in his mirrors. Far ahead, a radio tower's red eye winked, unhurried and certain. He liked this route because it was honest. Long, open, high country. No secrets in daylight. Very few at night. The wind found a speed and stuck with it. The stars were innumerable. Every sound in the cab had a job: thermos lid, seatbelt buckle, soft whir of the fan. He listened to an AM station that drifted in and out, old standards hosting themselves in the background. A roadside sign slid into view, reflective letters catching his headlights clean. Musical Road 1 mile. Maintain 45 miles per hour to hear the tune. He'd heard of these. One stretch of grooves cut into the pavement, nothing magical, physics doing what it does. He hadn't driven a musical segment at night before. He smiled without meaning to. At this hour, small, odd things feel like the world offering a handshake. He eased down to the posted 45 well before the segment, letting the truck settle. The wind shouldered the cab once and let go. In the quiet, he could hear his own tires thinking against the asphalt, that deep, comfortable murmur of rubber and road. The first grooves arrived with no fanfare. The hum climbed out of the floor and became a melody that wasn't quite cheerful, not the pep one might expect for a roadside novelty. It was minor, low, almost a lullaby a parent might hum when the house is dark and very still. Notes rose and fell at lengths that made sense to a body more than to a music teacher. It threaded under his bones and told them what speed felt like, rather than what a sign said. 45 exactly. the truck asking nothing more than his hands and his patience. He drove through the short song. It ended with a gentle cadence, as if bowing. Then the hum was gone. Only the road and the wind remained. He rolled the window down 2 inches and let cool air trim the edge of the cabin's warmth. He felt awake the way a person does after somebody has said their name in a friendly voice. Another sign, later, high wind area. Use caution. The night breathed around the mesas in long, even exhalations. Windsocks on short poles at the corners of the bridgeheads stood out at modest angles, not enough to be rude, enough to be noticed. His trailer caught a push, and then a polite release. He had hauled taller boxes that behaved worse. Tonight's load was polite and low. His radio fell into static, then found a travel advisory loop on 530 AM, the kind of low-power transmission rest areas and park entrances use for special instructions. A woman's voice read with clear, deliberate enunciation. State route advisory. Gusts possible at the San Magda Viaduct. Trucks maintain 45 miles per hour between milepost 146 and 150. Repeat, maintain 45 miles per hour. The timing lined up with what he was seeing on the green mileposts. The voice did not editorialize. It did not hurry him. He left the window cracked, let the desert's night smell had through, sage and dust, and the distant cold of rock. The second musical stretch announced itself with nothing but the light shimmy he felt in the wheel when the grooves begin. The sign for it had never appeared. He glanced at the shoulder, expecting a laid-back yellow diamond and a hint of tourist whimsy. Nothing. Just reflectors, scrub, and the opposite lane's white line floating by. But the hum came anyway, different this time, shorter phrases that nudged rather than sang. 2 notes low and close together, a pause, then again. Not a song, a conversation. He glanced at the speedometer. The needle lay steady on 45. He resisted the small impulse to test it at 47, then 43. He kept steady like it mattered. For more than this moment. There are plenty of ordinary explanations for how sound shows up where it shouldn't. Pavement ages into patterns, treads feather, rumble strips wander. He didn't argue with any of it. He drove like someone reading a paragraph where a few words are smudged. The meaning holds. The road rolled toward the San Magda Viaduct, a modest span over a dry river that woke up only after hard rains. In the dark, the bridge's shoulders turned into parapets of black flesh. The far end was no more than a suggestion. He checked the windsocks on their poles straight out now, one pointing clean southeast, one fluttering, uncommitted. He settled his hands on the wheel, not tight, not lazy. The tires hummed on with their new ideas about music. At the approach, another kind of tone added itself. The guard cables strung along the median, tight as guitar strings, found the same breeze his cab was feeling, and thrummed in sympathy. A long, low note sat under everything, like a drone. Layered with the grooves, it made chords that would have been impossible to design. The night sang on its own. Some part of him, the part that understands momentum and height better than language, listened. Halfway over the viaduct, a gust shoved the rig from the right in a way that asked for respect. The truck leaned into it, then back. Owen kept his line and his pace. If he'd been running 10 miles faster, the push would have had more to work with. If he were a different kind of driver, the hands on his wheel might have answered instead of moved. The far end of the bridge arrived like a finishing line that no one had applauded. The wind eased as land gathered itself around him again. Maintain 45 miles per hour, the advisory loop repeated. He checked the clock. The voice's timestamp mentioned an hour that hadn't quite arrived. He didn't do the arithmetic. Out here, clocks are wobbly things, especially at night. He liked them that way. The road dipped where the old alignment had peeled off decades ago. In the median there was a relic bridge, low stone arches half buried in sand, a pattern from a century when traffic was slower and water ran taller. When the highway wind lifted, the old arches sang too, or Owen told himself they did, because that kind of thinking keeps a person company when miles have a quiet personality. He took a turn out to breathe. It was a simple gravel apron with a fence and a small placard that daylight travelers probably read and forgot. He stood outside the cab with the engine off and felt the night-thin cold find his knuckles. The world without the truck's heartbeat hum seemed enormous and human at the same time. Somewhere across the riverbed, A metal gate bumped against its post in small hits, keeping its own time. The cables in the median sang their low note, neither cheerful nor sad. He could hear, far off, the irregular rhythm of another rig somewhere down the line catching the edges of rumble strips. You learn to place a truck by sound, the way you learn to place a thunderstorm. On the upright informational sign, the placard read, Old San Magda alignment, constructed 1931, survived 2 seasonal floods. Decommissioned 1985. The last line, smaller. During high winds, expect unusual acoustics. Reduce speed. Music may be present. Music may be present, he said aloud, because sometimes the absurdly correct thing is the most comforting thing. Back on the road, the AM loop had moved on to announce closures on a route 3 counties away. He tuned back to his drifting standards and let a trumpet line embroider quietly under the tires. A tanker merged from a ramp up ahead, graceful and slow, well-signaled, like someone used to being watched by physics. They settled into a gentle caravan that felt like holding a door for someone and having them hold another door for you a minute later. Miles later, the hum returned for a third time without the showmanship of a sign. Owen wasn't surprised. It came where the shoulder widened for a runaway ramp that bit into the hillside in a long scare of pale gravel. The grade here was nothing dramatic, but the wind, slicking down off the high rocks and into open valley, could play mean. The tune was only 3 notes, the same shape repeating, a reminder. Stay, stay, stay. The tanker ahead eased a little more to the right, not quite crossing onto the white line, just a visible respect made physical. Owen followed suit. The rigs became 2 calm lines of thought, in one head, separate and aligned. A pickup on the far side blew past in the left lane, wind carrying its spray of grit across both of them. In the mirror, something small and bright spun, a reflective triangle dislodged from somewhere, dancing along the shoulder before lying down. Ahead, the windsock on the post stood straight as an arrow. Dust skittered across the road surface in low snakes. The song kept its place under his wheels and then ended mid-phrase, as the ramp ended, like a sentence that doesn't need a period. He wondered who had chosen the tune originally, back when the county cut a promotional jingle into the asphalt to amuse daytime travelers. The local paper had covered it years back, he remembered. Complaints about noise from neighborhoods that wanted their nights quieter and their mornings less surprising. Staff trucks grinding a fresh skim of asphalt over the grooves to bring back the official silence. The idea that the song kept showing up anyway felt like something the place had decided to keep, like a nickname a road won't surrender. The valley opened. A sign promised gas at the next exit and coffee 24 hours. The tanker signaled and took the ramp. Owen stayed on, salt and peppered with the idea of coffee, and deciding, in the end, to let the rhythm of the next 20 miles carry him. The far lights of a plateau town shimmered like dew. He found the 5:30 a.m. advisory again, though he hadn't turned the dial. The voice now listed roadwork far to the south. At the end of the message, a glitch, a bleed-over of a prior recording. Maintain 45 miles per hour between markers 146 and 150. This message updated at, and the timestamp placed itself at a minute that had just ticked past on his own dash. For the first time that night, a little chill rolled along his forearms, unrelated to the air. He flexed his hands, glanced at the mile marker sliding by 147, then a green 148 clinging briefly to his periphery. He had cleared the viaduct miles ago. The wind had eased. Still, the advisory stuck to him like a hand on a shoulder, not stopping him, just not letting go. He didn't argue with it. There are worse voices to have in the cab than one that says, "Be measured." He kept to the right. Let the speed sit. Counted the reflectors like prayer beads. Somewhere ahead, a pair of taillights flickered on the shoulder, and then back to the lane, the tanker, rejoining after coffee. They fell into the same interval as before, the distance between them mathematically perfect again by accident or habit. The town's exit offered the usual cluster of glow fuel, a diner under a sign shaped like a cactus even though this part of the desert grew more rock than spines. He took it this time, pulled in under lights that made his hood shine like a slicked-back hairdo. The station hummed like a hive in a good mood. He topped off, then idled over to the diner lot, wide open at this hour, and picked a space far from the doors. Inside, the air carried bacon, in a way kitchens only manage after midnight when the air is thin and honest. A man 2 booths down wore a jacket with a patch from a trucking company Owen recognized. They traded the simple nod that says, "We're both awake in the same way." The waitress wrote coffee on his night, poured it like a blessing, and set down a laminated menu that had been wiped so many times it had learned to shine. "Wind catch you?" she asked, glancing toward the dark like it might lean through the window. "It pushed," he said. "We took it slow over the viaduct." She clicked her pen once and smiled, satisfied with the choice as though it had been hers. "They say the old road sings out there when it gets up. Folks have been hearing that since before I was born. My uncle said he could tell when the arches were talking in the dust even with the radio up. Says you don't fight that song. You let it have the lead." The man in the jacket looked up from his plate. "They paved over the tune couple years back," he said. "Remember when they cut it? Tour buses ran it all day. Neighbors got mad. County smoothed it out, but I still hear it some nights. Not the same notes, but close. It asks for 45 and a mindset." Owen stirred sugar into his coffee without needing the sweetness. The spoon made a small bell out of the cup. "You run it tonight? Hour ahead of you," the man said. Wind got squirrely near the runaway path. My trailer wagged like it wanted a conversation. Music settled it some. Or maybe I settled because I thought I heard it. Either way, here I am, egg side up on the plate instead of flipped in a ditch. No one laughed. The line wasn't a joke, merely a way to say thanks without saying the word. The waitress topped the coffee without asking. Outside, the station's canopy lights buzzed gently, and beyond them the highway held the same measured shadow it had before. When he paid, a flyer near the register caught his eye. Local Historical Society talk, the sound of roads. A black and white photo showed the old stone arches over the dry river. A Model A posed like a brave animal on top. The caption beneath it read, in italics, "Some structures hum when they want to be remembered." He went back to the truck in a frame of mind usually reserved for churches. He checked the straps on his trailer just to lay hands on something he trusted and then climbed in. The cab held the warm shape of him from before, a small domestic comfort. He turned the key. The engine came alive with the professional kindness of a machine that means to do exactly what it's made to do. On the on-ramp, a wind tug found him again. Nothing like before, more a reminder of scale than a test. As the needle passed 50, then 55, he let his foot relax until it fell back to 45. No reason other than the way the night had chosen to speak and the way he'd chosen to listen. The road did not sing. That was fine. He carried the melody anyway, humming it without sound, a pattern set in his hands and in the angle of his shoulders. The old arches down in the dark kept their counsel. The guard cables slept in their low note. And if, a mile past the viaduct, a short run of grooves he had never noticed before, whispered 3 notes in sequence. Stay, stay, stay. It was the sort of thing a person does not mention on the radio in case the talking breaks it. He kept the tune to himself and drove on, keeping speed where the world had asked him to keep it, and letting the big desert hold up the rest. Story number 5. Snow had a way of changing the sound of a truck. It softened the language of tires and turned the world outside into a muffled room. Ruth eased her rig onto the grade that led to Silver Notch Pass, and felt the weight of her load settle like a well-behaved animal. She had chains in their tubs, gloves tucked warm behind the seat, and a thermos steeped strong enough to last the climb. The sky was the color of a turned pocket. A low moon sat behind the weather, diffused, more of a presence than a thing. Out here the highway put down its own rules in winter. Snow gates could swing across the lanes without hurt feelings. The shoulders narrowed under drifts. Corridors between snow fences made the view into a long white hallway. The signage was honest and spare. Chain up area 2 miles, one sign told her, and then kindly repeated itself in a different tone. When beacon flashes, chains required. The beacon above the next gantry was dark. The road, for the moment, was merely complicated rather than insistent. Ruth preferred it that way. She liked the clean work of adjusting to a place, instead of arguing with it. At the first turnout, a long apron of asphalt swept clean by previous truckers, she downshifted and eased in. The wind found straight lines through the snow fences and wrote them across the hood in powder. She set the brake and let the engine idle, heed a patient friend. Snow crystals ticked on the windshield in a way that made a person aware of every square inch of glass. Another rig sat 40 yards up with marker lights low and calm. Driver's door closed, no footprints fresh on the ground. It looked staged, like an illustration in a winter driving class. Ruth watched it a breath longer than necessary, waiting for the small signs of life exhaust. Plume, wipers, a shift of weight in the cab. Nothing. The trailer's sides wore a skin of soft frost. The number on the cab door had been rubbed clean by a gloved hand sometime earlier. She found herself counting the studs in its tires, as if number would equal reassurance. On the wind came the faint metallic clink of chains, not the loud rattle of someone flinging them, but the polite, decisive click that happens when a crosslink meets its place on a side chain. The sound came from the far end of the turnout where the drift rose to the fence. She stepped down with one glove on and one glove off, because some tasks demand bare fingers if they're going to go right. The cold bit like mint. The chain-up station had a small wooden kiosk shaped like a bus stop. Inside, a laminated card showed diagrams for ladder chains and single sides, tidy lines and arrows that lived in their own dry world. Someone had left a coffee cup on the bench, empty, placed carefully upside down to keep out snow. A red string hung from a nail in the back wall with a tag on it. Return times. Beneath it, 3 names in a fine hand and 3 times, each from hours before. She didn't need anyone's permission to proceed. The courtesy of the list felt like a note left on a counter. Use what you need. Tell us when you're back. Overhead, the unlit beacon above the snow gate gave a single slow pulse of amber and went dark again, the way a sleeping person's eyelids might flutter once. Ruth looked up at it and then down at her own boots. Blown snow scrolled across the asphalt in quiet ribbons. She opened the tubs and brought out the chains. There is a right way to set chains and a dozen wrong ways. She laid theirs out straight, shook them once to remember their shape, fed them behind the tire with the satisfied sound of iron dragging across sealed snow, and fastened top, then bottom, then tightened and snugged. Her fingers lost track of time and only counted links. The world shrank to her breathing and the steady near silence of falling. The other rig up the turnout clicked once more, or the place itself clicked. She couldn't tell which. 2 chains per side, then the next axle, steady as knitting. When she finished, she rose, stamped her boots on the step to clear loose snow, and eased back into the cab. The heater nursed warmth into the last cold corner of her sleeves. The grade began without drama, wipers set to a rhythm that matched the speed. The dash dimmed politely. Signs for the pass stacked like gentle reminders. No stopping. Next. 3 miles, avalanche. Zone. Do not enter when lights flash. A series of tall poles along the right shoulder wore numbers like rulers for a classroom giant, markers to show crews where the real world ended when the plows were buried to their mirrors. Ruth kept to a pace that left room for reasons. She stayed off the paint where it had gone shy under the powder. Her tires took the road like an agreement. She was alone in the lane, but not alone on the route. Somewhere ahead and somewhere behind other trucks moved in their own spheres, tied to her by weather and rules. Snow makes a light that isn't light. Even in a night like this, the air glowed from below. It made small tunnels around the headlamps and pushed everything else back into a clean anonymity. When the wind shifted, snowfields threw their shadows across the road like slow-moving rivers. It was on one of those long bends, just as the trees lifted away and the slope revealed itself like a shoulders squared, that she saw the first flicker of an amber light ahead. It sat at the height of a plow's roof mount. It turned, slow and regular, the familiar spin of a beacon doing its one uncomplicated job. No headlamps framed it, no taillights followed. Nothing metallic broke the white, just that measured warmth sliding around and away, and then around again. She didn't mind it. If a plow was up there, she'd be grateful just to see the crown of it. She didn't try to close the distance. Drivers who chased lights in weather like this made trouble. She kept the same small margin and watched the beacon rotate. The road curved and the light dipped as if cresting a shallow wave. When she entered a shortcut between rock and wind, the light picked up speed relative to her, like a kite getting the same gust. Road conditions? Someone asked on Channel 19, thin and far. Ruth let the voice pass. A different voice answered with a county name and a milepost number and a weather red that matched what she was seeing. She left the CB alone and kept her attention on the things her hands could control. The plow's amber held 50 yards ahead of her for a mile, then 2. It neither drew away nor let her draw near. It entered the mouth of an avalanche shed, a long concrete gallery that overhung the road like a brim. Inside, the light made the arched ceiling glow as if the tunnel itself were alive. Snow shook from the ledge above, powder sliding down like feathers. Her own headlights found the inside walls and the painted height markings, and then, through the far mouth, the amber turned its steady circle and slipped out into the weather again. Ruth checked her speed by habit. The needle lay a breath under what she thought it was. The chains made their particular stitched sound under her seat, a rhythm that calmed. The wind ran fingers across the roof and moved on. The next sign counted distance to the crest and asked for patience. Ahead, the snow gate's red lenses were dark. The next one, beyond the bend, was lit, not steady but in a slow pulse, the rate of a calm heartbeat. She felt her foot ease by itself. She had driven closures before. You don't argue with them. She rolled into a careful stop on the shoulder at a marked turnout just short of the gate. Her hazard lights made a small warm room behind her. The amber up ahead turned a few more times in the dark and went out, like a hand waved just enough to be seen and then tucked into a coat sleeve. She waited with the engine idling low. The quiet seeped in. On the far slope above the road, horn speakers sat on poles. Gazix units for avalanche control. White and round, like oversized bells. A recorded voice from a roadside transmitter came to her on 1610 AM when she nudged the dial. Avalanche mitigation in progress. Expect delays up to 20 minutes. Do not stop in unprotected areas. Crews appreciate your patience. No crews were visible. That was part of the point. The work here happened by remote and radio, and habit learned over years. She sipped her thermos and watched the red pulse on the gate. A long line of dark trees on the north face flexed as wind moved through them. The slope above them held its breath. The blast, when it came, was not a bang, but a deep push of air. A bass note you feel more than hear. The snow on the slope released, as if a muscle unclenched. A white cloud folded down and across the cut of the road farther ahead, graceful and terrifying, not because it wanted to be, but because gravity was doing the only trick it knows. The avalanche was small by mountain standards, a curtain of powder that reached the far ditch in a slow, inevitable pour, carrying with it only the suggestion of branches and the sound of 1,000 soft breaths exhaled at once. Ruth watched it from her safe place the way a person watches a wave pass under a pier. When the cloud settled, the red lens blinked twice and went dark. A green hung under it woke, steady and quiet. Somewhere beyond the curve, a loader would be starting to push. Though she couldn't hear it, she put the rig back in gear, let the chains catch, and moved out. The road after the crossing felt different under her wheels, the newly packed snow slightly firmer, like a seam had been stitched across it. She kept expecting to see the plow that should have been there, somewhere just far enough ahead that she couldn't catch it. Instead, the hill gave her a pocket of clear air, followed by another that acted like a larger place in miniature. The beacon reappeared around the next shoulder of rock, right where a driver would want reassurance. It turned in its slow circle, as if the mast beneath it had no weight to keep it to the earth. She followed the warmth of it because it made sense, and because, if there was anything up ahead more real than a circle of light, she would discover it at a speed that allowed for correction. At the crest, a small station sat back from the road, a shed for plow blades, a low cinder block building with 2 windows lit. Ruth turned in on bare pavement missed by the drift. It was not a full depot, just a warming hut and a place to stage equipment if conditions thought about getting stubborn. She set the brake near the far fence, where a row of dark plows rested. Their blades wore rims of ice like modest collars. She counted them without counting 2, 4, 6 enough to make the main line clean when the hour asked for it. Inside, the hut smelled like wool and coffee. A bulletin board held maps with colored pins and a paper chain of past closures. A radio on the counter chattered with small information in a voice that had decided not to get excited. A man in a heavy sweater looked up from a thermos cup and nodded with the casual hospitality of someone who lives at the edge of weather. He had the sturdy calm of a person who knew where each shovel in the shed belonged. "How's the east face?" he asked. "Breathing," Ruth said. Mitigation just did a small one above the third gate. He made a mark on a sheet of paper with a stubby pencil. That tracks. Sensors gave a nudge. He glanced past her shoulder, out to the lot. You came up alone? She thought about how to say it, and decided to say it plain. I kept a safe distance on what looked like a plow beacon. Never caught you. All my steel's right there, he said and pointed with the pencil through the glass. None of us out since midnight. Too touchy to run blades. We let the gas cannons do their song, and then we clean when the slopes have had their say. Must have been a tower light, she offered, though she hadn't seen a tower. He didn't argue or agree, just smiled at whatever passed across his mind. They say there's a lantern up there, he said after a sip. Eyes on the frost rime along the window's edge. Old-timers mean it plain. Folks see an amber and it keeps them tidy, and more often than not they stay where the crown is and not where the drifts want to shove them. I don't make a speech out of it. I've seen people follow worse ideas. Lantern of the Pass, she said, tasting the words as if they were a local pastry. That's what they call it. My boss calls it normal reflection in snow crystals. He's not wrong. My aunt calls it a kindness. She's not wrong either. He pushed a plate of crackers in her direction with the air of a person sharing an old trick. When you head down the west, stay off the inside ruts where the buses polish it too much. The ice there will look friendly. It is not. Ruth nodded and let a minute pass in companionable noise, the hum of the small heater, the click of building heat on metal. On the corkboard near the door hung a sepia photo of a plow parked at a crest like this one, its blade clean in a way only fresh snow makes it. The roof wore an amber beacon in a shape the county didn't use anymore, taller and rounder like a warning light on an old tow truck. Someone had written a name under the photo, Vega, followed by a date that sat comfortably in the past. The caption in neat print read, "First across before the west wind died." She didn't ask for the story that went with the photo. She didn't need it. Some nights are better when the facts stay arranged in their boxes and the feelings are allowed to walk around. Back on the west side, the grade began gently and then committed. The trees leaned back from the cut, as if to make room. Ruth kept her pace in the measured place between too slow to steer and too fast to argue. The road presented little tests, a drift that had decided to be a wave, a patch of polished snow the color of secrets, a place where the plow berm had collapsed and wanted to pull a tire toward it. She answered each by doing the ordinary thing exactly right. The beacon appeared once more, an amber coin turning in the dark ahead at the height where she now expected it. She shrugged in a way that felt like gratitude and kept her distance. The snow fell in feathers, then in grains, then not at all. The line of sky broke open to the west, a strip of paler darkness that meant the valley had ideas about clearing. As the road bent to give her a view of the low country, the light faded out as if a dimmer had been slid, the circle slower, then slower still, then done. She felt the quiet that comes after a song ends, and you realize you were holding a part of yourself ready to join the last note. The chain sang the last length of the pitchy downhill until a sign at a broad turnout asked kindly, "Chains off here." She rolled in as far as the pavement allowed, and stopped where her lights didn't blow anyone else's outline to pieces. That same other rig, or its twin, sat a dozen spaces down, still and perfect. Snow vermicelli laid thin on its surfaces, in a way wind does when the air has time to play. This time, a faint curtain of exhaust trailed from its stack. Someone was home in there after all. On the ground, her boots sank half an inch, and then found the roughness of a parking lot that had seen a summer's worth of oil and a winter's worth of salt. She worked the tensioners and eased the chains off in reverse of the ritual, laying them on the mat she kept for the purpose, instead of dropping them in a way that would haunt her later. The iron settled in coils, patient, waiting for warmth and a towel. The air at this lower elevation felt generous by comparison, only a little sharp at the nose, a promise that the last miles to town would be simple. She shook out her gloves and stood for a second, listening to the leftover night. Somewhere in the dark trees, a bird made the single sound winter birds make to let their own hearts know they were still in there. Farther off, but not too far, a siren whooped once and died. Not emergency so much as a vehicle testing its throat. The chain tub lids made a tidy plastic clack when they sealed. As she turned to climb back into the cab, a reflection of amber played once across the chromed edge of her mirror. She looked up and found nothing to match it but the flashing obstruction lights on a power line tower far across the valley. They winked their own rhythm, white to red to white, too slow to be what she'd chased. She smiled despite herself and let the small coincidence be a coincidence. Somewhere between the turnout and the first cluster of buildings that considered themselves a town, the 1610 AM travel voice signed off with the weight of someone who had done their job when most people were asleep. Avalanche control complete, it said. Use caution for reaccumulation in shaded areas. There was not a word about lanterns or beacons. There didn't need to be. The valley floor felt vast after the pass, the road long and wide and edged with fences that had winter in their shoulders. Old snow slid off the roofs of low barns in paragraphs. A diner's sign spelled out hot soup in orange letters, whose bulbs worked in the funny cadence of old wiring, 2 on, 1 off, the same 2 on, a different 1 off. She might have stopped if her hours were different. She would stop at the next place and let the motor tick and rest. The night had already given her the kind of grace she didn't want to crowd. At the next maintenance yard, just past the river bridge where reeds wrote calligraphy on ice, a row of plows sat under a canopy. One of them had a new style beacon. One had the older lens, the rounder kind with a rippled surface. People keep spares. Departments keep old gear for one last season. As she passed, the older one flashed once in the corner of her eye. She turned her head a reflex and saw only dark glass, runaway ramp snow tidy beside it, and a mechanic's lunchbox sitting on a bench like a small animal waiting for a whistle. Ruth drove on into the open country. She kept her speed even, and her thoughts milk-warm and quiet. If the road wanted to sing, it had done so. If a light had wanted to be a guide, it had guided. She let the heater keep its slow conversation with the cold and listened to the last of the chain sound fade from the wheel well like an orchestra, packing up politely after a good evening. The horizon learned a shade lighter of black. Her route turned there. She turned with it. She would deliver on time. She would sleep like a person who had earned an uncomplicated morning. And if she remembered, later, the way that amber circle kept to the crown of the road as if it had memorized safety and meant to share, it would be the sort of memory that does not insist on being explained. Some places take care of their own, the way a lantern keeps the inside of a room gentle. All a driver has to do is notice and keep steady hands. Story number 6. The river made the dark look deeper. It lay out there like a quiet animal, wide and sure of itself, shouldering between low wooded banks and the last of the mills. Cal had run this route enough to know the long way around, the extra loop of interstate and bridge farther north. But the ferry cut 40 miles in an hour if a person caught it right. He liked catching things right. The signs in the last 10 miles, white letters on brown boards, offered the same set of promises in different ways. State ferry, 8 miles. Trucks allowed. Last departure 1:15 a.m. He rolled through a sleeping town that smelled faintly of river mud and diesel. Streetlights pooled gold on wet pavement. Christmas lights, left up longer than they were supposed to, hummed quietly around porch rails. At the hill's bottom, the road arrowed down to the landing. The water there met the concrete ramp in an easy lick, not much chop, a few bulb-tipped reeds moving like music only they could hear. A traffic signal above the ramp, red on one side, green on the other, had both lenses dark. A sandwich board on the shoulder said, Lane 2 trucks. He eased into it and found himself alone, his engine making all the cabin noise there was. A figure in a reflective jacket walked toward him from a small office with windows like eyes. The figure lifted a hand, 2 fingers, the gesture all ferry deckhands learned that means easy, slow, you're fine. Straight on, driver, the figure called, voice trimmed by the night air. Line up on the 4. Brake, we chalk your drive. He pulled forward onto the deck. The surface was steel-painted grit gray, wet in patches, with stencils of numbers in white at intervals. He found 4 painted clean and stopped where it told him to. The ferry's lights held steady amber and white. He set the brake and felt the rig shift from animal to furniture under him. There were 2 sedans behind him, both quiet, occupants' silhouettes. A box truck older than his pulled alongside the opposite lane, its door logo fishboned by age. A school bus shell sat forward by the bow gate, windows taped, seats gone. The kind of county auctions when it's tired of hearing a radio call, Route 7 too often. The deckhand bent and fit a wooden chock against Cal's drive tire with the quiet ceremony of someone laying a doorstop in an old house. A tag tied to the chock by a cotton string flipped over once in the slight breeze and lay still. Stay in your rig, the deckhand said, kind and strict in the same sentence. No smoking, No engines till we tell you. He tapped a knuckle on the fender like a friend and moved on. The boat's horn gave a long, low call. It sounded unhurried, a voice introduced at a party that expected everyone to know it already. The PA clipped alive overhead with a lag, then caught up, the captain's voice even and dry. Good morning. We're the last run. Crossing will take 12 minutes. Current strong tonight. Please remain in vehicles. Brake set. We'll call you off by lane at North Landing. Lines thumped off the bollards with a young man's energy. The water made a sound that didn't quite clap and didn't quite hush. Cal felt, more than saw, the ferry give a careful sideways shrug, nose finding the line across the current, and then settling on it like a thought settling into place. The dock slid behind them with the same calm a curtain has sliding across a stage. He cut the CV to a low whisper out of habit, not expecting anything, and listened to the ferry's particular vocabulary of vibration. The thrusters had that familiar constant undernote, the right kind of rumble that told a person nothing unexpected was happening. Somewhere below his feet a pump coughed once, and then remembered every hour it had done this job, and returned to steady. The river lay to either side like dark velvet. A few lighted windows on the far shore told him where future people would be in 12 minutes. Downstream, a bridge he never took at this hour made a low cut across the sky, its red obstruction lights blinking even and indifferent. Fog, thin at first, gathered midway, a quiet white seam sown by temperature alone. Through it, shore lights blurred into soft coins. He glanced at the chalk tag because it was there. A small human thing on a big slab of boat. It was laminated, scratched at the edges, with a number in black and a name in pen, letters shore and plain. Nick. 117. A date in the corner belonged to a year that looked comfortable, not new and not old. He admired the deckhand's neatness for a second, and then watched the water again. Overhead, a life ring hung with the boat's name on it in black capitals. North Lander. It swung an inch on its hook with the motion. Another life ring, farther down the rail, carried a different name, Mercy of Pines. He glanced back quickly to the first, and saw North Lander again. The second read, equally steady, North Lander. He counted to 3 under his breath and didn't look a third time. Boats replace rings on schedules that have nothing to do with him. The PA crackled with a polite reminder about headlights. A thank you, with no one to answer it, followed. Somewhere behind him, a seat creaked in a sedan as someone shifted the weight of their evening. From the box truck opposite, a tiny click of a lighter betrayed itself, followed by the speed and certainty with which that click was undone. No smoking. People try. People remember some rules have reasons. They reached the fog seam. The boat's horn gave 2 shorter calls. An answer came back from upriver, further than felt possible, low and round. The fog thickened just enough to make the world a room whose windows had sheer curtains. Lights on the deck, halos out, one halo briefly stuttering, and then regaining its clean circle as a generator found its preference again. In that one drop in return, the deck changed. Cal knew it instantly in his bones, the way a dancer knows when a floorboard isn't flush. 5 seconds of dim. That's all. The sort of brief swallow of light any old vessel gives when a breaker thinks about thinking. In those 5 seconds, he felt rather than saw the bus by the bow become a bus with windows not taped, reflecting rows of invisible interior lines, then shift back when the light steadied. He thought he saw in his mirror a line of red taillights stacked aft along the rail, more vehicles than had come aboard. He looked again and saw only the 2 sedans and their separate patients. He told himself it was reflection and fog, and a night that was generous with its tricks. The ferry's vibration changed pitch. Not wrong. Holding. The captain's voice returned, small as if the microphone had been asked to be a secret. Stand by midstream for floating debris. We'll thread it. The boat angled its nose with a grace impossible for something carrying this much steel, engines murmuring the kind of corrective conversation only captains and rivers have. Cal felt his rig's weight lean a fraction against the chalk and the brake, and then settle back. The chalk tag hopped just enough to flip and show the other side. A second pen mark lived there in different handwriting, less careful. Last run, underlined twice, and the same time, 117. The number on the last departure sign at the landing had been 115. The tag's time didn't make it spooky. It made it precise. He could have asked the deckhand about it. He didn't. He watched the black behind the rail and saw a shape move under the surface, no more than the suggestion of a log. It bumped the hull with a polite thud. In his head rose the checkerboard of all the advice he had ever been given about what to do when a thing heavier than you decides to keep moving while you must not. He didn't need the advice. The boat didn't need it either. It handled what the river sent the way a person with a good memory handles a recurring question. Fog burned thinner. Shore lights regained their crispness. The boat straightened like a person adjusting their coat. How a gull found this much river in the middle of the night was none of his business. Dipped into the light, recalibrated its understanding of air, and left with a shrug. The deckhand in the jacket walked the lanes with the same pace as before, checking chocks with a boot toe, checking straps with eyes that had seen every kind of strap. He passed under the light by Cal's bumper and looked up as if he knew the feeling of being watched. The jacket's silver stripes stuttered once in the light. Cal lifted his hand off the wheel and inched driver to deckhand, the universal, "We're fine." The man nodded, then bent out of sight at the bus. When he straightened, the tape on the windows looked like tape again. One thing changed. It was small. The safety PA that had read the same script since the boat was new now spoke with a warm hiss in its vowels, the sound of tired speakers. "Remain in your vehicles." The words came in, then went out as if they came from a reel feeding a second too slow. "Do not start engines until directed." The message ended with a chime older than the chime that had started the crossing. He took a breath and let it out, willing his shoulders to lower half an inch. He had worked midnights in the past, and his body liked them. The mind makes mischief when too much quiet stacks up in one place. He knew that too. North Landing slid toward them, pilings cratered by seasons of tide. The ramp's concrete scored where trucks had made the same decision for years. A small cinderblock building with its own rules taped to the window. The dock worker there stood with hands folded under armpits, a cap pulled low, breath making small flags. He lifted a hand, accepting the boat the way a host accepts a guest, not too celebratory, not bored. The boat nudged the fenders and held. The ramp lowered with a healthy squeal. The deckhand lifted his hand and called, "Lane 1. Go ahead. Lane 2. Stand by." The box truck groaned and rolled off. A sedan followed at a careful, almost reverent pace, as if tipping a hat. The voice said, "Lane 2. And Cal watched the bus go, no driver visible. Which made sense, considering it had been lowered on earlier, with a tow then eased his rig forward. Halfway to the ramp, the deckhand put his palm up. "Stop." The light on the ramp was green, but the palm up meant more than green. Cal stopped. Brake set. Hands loose. He waited. The deckhand walked to the edge and looked under the bow lip as if checking for a thing that wasn't his to check, nodded at nothing, then waved Cal on. The pause took 2 seconds. The shape of it stayed with him like the rhythm of a wordless tune. Off the boat, the concrete of the landing felt differently old than the steel of the deck had. Tires shuddered for a half inch, and then took to the familiar surface of the road with gratitude. He glanced in the mirror. The ferry had already started to think about the trip back, the ramp rising, the deckhand's jacket scripting a simple route across the lanes. One of the life rings at the rail caught the landing light just so, letters inked on the white in a neat capital hand. Myrrh. Then the boat's angle took the rest away, and the ring said Northlander again, as if correcting itself politely. He pulled into the lot where trucks queued for customs on busy days and parked long enough to walk into the little building. Its door protested like a flute. The room smelled like coffee that had learned the building's history. An older woman at the window took his fare with a square reader and slid a paper receipt under the glass, as if paper still mattered to machines the way it mattered to people. "Smooth tonight?" she asked, and the tone didn't ask for a story so much as offer a place one could sit if one wanted. "Smooth enough," he said. Fog sat down in the middle for a minute. The captain did fine. "Current runs cross-eyed when it goes cold quick like this." She nodded toward the river with her chin. On the near wall hung a black and white photo of a ferry with a name he hadn't seen, the Mercy of Pines, pushing a bus across under a sky that had been all hinge and no door back then. On its rail, a deckhand smiled big for no one in particular, cap crooked, a chalkboard slung by rope behind him with a time scrawled on it. In the corner, 117. The woman noticed him noticing. Used to put the last departure on the board by hand, she said. Nick, that was him, would write it every night and flip the board if the captain forgot to change it. He retired, then didn't. Finally, the clock retired him. Some things stick around. The chalkboard's long gone. But somebody still writes his name on the chalk tags when the mood strikes. Makes the night feel tended to. Cal slid his receipt into the pocket where he kept small papers. The chalk tag lay on his dash, where he'd set it without thinking, the string wrapped twice around itself. Nick. 117. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Back in the cab, the river gave him the gift it gives to anyone who will meet its gaze for a second. It let him see that the kind of dark it wears at night is not empty. He rolled out of the lot, onto the low road that becomes a big road, and felt the truck settle into the idea that it would go on doing its job. The tires hummed the way tired men hum when a task has gone right. The heater threaded a line of warmth through the floor vents that felt undeserved and therefore extra good. 10 minutes upriver, a little gas station warmed its rectangle of concrete with white light. He took the shoulder of the lot, not for fuel, just to stretch. In the glass door was a rack with flyers. The top one advertised a historical society talk. Our river crossings, then and now. A smaller, half-sheet taped crooked beside it read, in a hand like the chalks, last run tonight 117. N. The station clerk must have been bored, or kind. In the quiet of his walk-around habit, doesn't care if there's a river in it or not. He saw a thin scuff in road film on the trailer's side at chalk height. It was nothing. A mark the world puts on trucks because that's what it does. He wiped at it with his glove and left a streak of clean paint underneath like a flag. He shook his head at himself and smiled. When he climbed back in, a voice on the AM band he hadn't left on said something like goodbye in a tone that felt like it meant it. North Landing closing for the night. See you at first light. The voice tugged like a small rope on the edge of some corner of him. He clicked the radio down to a rich low hum and eased onto the road. The river was gone from sight, but its shape stayed. He crossed a low place where the road slabs met and thought he felt a phantom roll under his wheels, the particular sway that happens when a deck dips and rises with a small wake. He almost laughed, because he had slept on boats and knew how that feeling lingers when you take land back under your feet. He took the feeling like a night mint and let it dissolve. Miles unspooled. Pine gave way to open fields and the kind of signs that brag about breakfast. He didn't tell anyone about the second life ring. He didn't tell anyone about the 5-second dim where a bus got its seats back and then left again. He kept those as personal as a warm coat. Not because they were a secret or because they were sacred. Because they were what the night had offered when he minded his lane and did small things right. Somewhere ahead, the interstate would take him away from water and into October corn that hadn't learned its new name yet. The river would keep moving across the dark like it always does, indifferent and strangely careful. Nick, or somebody writing Nick's name for the pleasure of writing it, would mark one more tag and flip it onto a chalk with a sinuous little flick of the string. The deck would take the weight of whatever rolled onto it next, and Cal would carry the soft, accurate memory of listening to heavy water push under steel while a boat, old enough to have 2 names if it wanted, did what it was built to do. He set his speed, checked his mirrors, and kept one small thought at the far edge of his mind where it wouldn't bother anyone. Some nights, the road becomes a boat, and the boat becomes a road, and the best thing a person can do is be steady on either. Story number 7. The 2-lane ran flat across the bottomland, then lifted just enough to make a person notice the lights of a small town ahead. Fields gave way to hedgerows, then to clusters of houses that seemed to pull their curtains tighter at night. A river paralleled the road a quarter-mile off to the right, a smooth, dark ribbon that kept its own time, regardless of asphalt. Evan drove his rig with a quiet patience that came from a lifetime of not hurrying around fixed things, bridges, livestock, weather, rail lines. The trailer behind him held a load of palletized feed. It liked a steady hand. He saw the first sign for the crossing bright blue, bolted to a post before he saw the actual rails. It gave a number and an emergency line, the kind of information that looks like a footnote until the moment it doesn't. 100 yards on, round crossbucks leaned toward the road, and a pair of red lenses waited like polite eyes. He cut the radio down and eased his foot as the bell began, soft at first, then steady. The red lights came up, the arms folded down with patient authority. He stopped a truck length back from the gate, Brakes set, hazards off. The night was a flat, cool thing, smelling of damp cotton and creosote. The town's last streetlight stood at the far corner like a watchman who had already given most of his shift. Somewhere to the south, a bar's door opened and closed, letting out a single burst of conversation, then keeping it. No headlight yet, no horn. Just the bell and the small ticking sound signal cabinets make when relays are happy. He glanced at the blue placard again because names are comfort. DOT, crossing 476 903, U, Railroad Emergency 800. He read the whole number, quietly. He could see the rails silver in his low beams, a clean pair of lines set into the planks. On the far side of the road, the gravel curved down toward the river in a little access path. No sign, just a place trucks had turned around for 50 years. A minute passed. The bell kept its easy time. A grain hauler eased up in the opposite lane and came to a halt square with the gate. The driver lifted a hand in the way drivers do in places like this. "Hello, we're both here. No big deal." Evan returned the gesture. The grain hauler's cab lights glowed soft green. Somewhere in that green, the driver's dog stood and then sat, a silhouette with ears like commas. 5 minutes. No headlight. The bell did not tire. The red lights did not flicker. The arms held steady like arms are supposed to hold. Evan set the brake deeper, thumbed his phone awake, and did the ordinary thing drivers are taught to do. He dialed the number on the placard. It rang 3 times, then 4. A recorded voice gave a menu with a tone that would have worked equally well for a dentist. He pressed the options the way the recording asked. A person picked up. A woman with a voice like warm paper. Railroad emergency. Location? He read the crossing number and the road name. He said the town. He described the bell and the lights and the lack of train in that calm, precise way truckers learn, so that strangers on phones can decide what to do. "Thank you," she said. He could hear keyboards. "We're not seeing any movement scheduled in your window. The dispatcher's board shows maintenance all night from county line to the river trestle. Crossing may be in a hold. Please do not drive around the arm." "I won't," he said, because there was no universe in which he would. "I'll notify signal. If you can, stay put. If safe to do so, call back if anything changes. I'll ring you if I have an update." The bell knocked on the night like a measured heartbeat. The grain hauler keyed his CB low power, just enough for the short distance. "You seeing anything?" "No train," Evan said. "Emergency line says maintenance." "Might be stuck." "Figures," the other man said. "I can smell the river from here. Trestle fogs over quick when it goes cold like this. Line gets fussy. I'll sit." He chuckled without amusement. "That bell's going to live in my head." A third vehicle rolled up behind Evan at a quiet speed, an older SUV with a canoe rack. It stopped back a respectful distance. Its headlights clicked off. The bell didn't mind. Evan watched the rails. Sometimes a person can feel weight coming by the way the steel starts speaking to itself. The only vibration he sensed was the small tremor of engines idling far from him, the way a town hums without meaning to. He put his window down an inch. The night widened. Crickets ticked the edge of their season. The river moved like silk pulled over a table. He looked up at the signal cabinets. The older one, painted a dull silver, wore a pair of padlocks fat with paint. The newer one sang quietly to itself in electronics. Through the little vents in their doors, warm air slipped out and made the smell of all signal cabinets everywhere. Dust, heat, varnish, dry paper. A lantern appeared to his right along the fence line, down by the river path. Not a flashlight's hard circle. Not the cold blue of LEDs. This was a warmer shape, yellow, the sort of light a glass globe makes when it's been lit for years. It bobbed here and there, once, twice, then steadied and moved toward the cabinets. The silhouette of a person walked with it, not hurried. Reflective strips on a jacket answered his low beams. Silver, then dark, then silver again with each step. The figure opened the door of the older cabinet with a tool that looked like a tool but not the kind he had seen lately. Glove, shoulder, hat brim. The bell changed pitch by a breath, like a metronome nudged a fraction. The figure reached in, tapped something decisively the way maintenance people do when a piece of gear just needs to be reminded what its job is. The red lenses pulsed in the same cadence, but seemed for one strange second warmer. closer to the glow of a brake light on a vehicle from 30 years ago. Then they were as they had been. The lantern swung once in his direction in a courtesy that felt older than polite waves. The grain hauler leaned forward in his seat. Perhaps to get a better look, Evan lifted an open hand off the wheel by an inch, a small, even greeting that acknowledged competence. The figure turned, walked the ballast stone, and stepped over the rail with the ease of someone who had done it tens of thousands of times off the clock and on. The phone rang back. Same woman, same paper-warm tone. "Sir? Our maintainer's en route from the west. He's 20 minutes out. Please remain stopped. I'm not seeing track authority released yet. The crossing may cycle." Evan glanced at the lantern at the cabinet. "There's someone working the box now," he said. "Jacket on, lantern. He's checking connections." A pause, keyboard a little faster. "We don't have anyone at that crossing yet," she said carefully. "If you see a vehicle, please advise." "No truck," he said. "He's on foot." Another pause, longer. When she spoke, the tone had the professional calm of a person who does not want to give a feeling a name and therefore chooses none. "Copy that," she said. "Please stay where you are." The lantern moved to the far side of the road and held in place. The bell kept its duty. The gates stayed down. A pair of headlights in the distance bounced, rose, and approached on the county road that paralleled the tracks. A pickup. As it neared the crossing, the driver slowed, rolled his window down, and stuck a head out in the way of someone making a decision he would rather someone else make. The lantern lifted and held, palm up in light, an unmistakable don't. The pickup nodded. In that way pickups nod, a small dip of the hood, and backed into the little gravel path cleanly, turning around and heading away, as if remembering an errand in the other direction. The SUV behind Evan lost patience silently. It idled back, turned, and slipped away toward the town, made a block, then came up to the crossing from another street, and admitted it had just traded one pair of red lights for the same pair. It parked under the streetlight to wait, perhaps for someone else to solve it. The grain hauler on the other side spoke softly over the CB. "You notice anything odd? Other than everything?" Evan said, "Just this side of dry." "What do you mean?" "The bell. It's not the electronic tone. It's the old one. Mechanical." He tapped his mic twice, then twice again. The bell's rhythm did not care. "My granddad worked section crews. Those bells had spring hearts. This one sounds like that. It didn't 5 minutes ago." Evan listened to it the way one listens to a machine one knows well and hears new. He could hear the slight breath before the ring, the tiny intake of the clapper, if such a thing were possible. The relay tick, once a backdrop, now sounded more like a metronome and less like static. "Maybe maintenance is forcing it," he said. Even as he said it, he knew he was placing a picture over a picture to make the fit work. From downstream, not far perhaps, the old trestle. The low wind moved upriver and brought with it a scent that was river and cold steel and fresh wood shavings. He could not place the last, not out in damp air. It climbed into the cab through the inch he had left the window and sat there like someone's jacket draped on a chair. Headlight. Far down the line, past the bend, a light presented itself, a bright, clean disc, low to the tracks at first, then climbing as though a grade lifted it. Evan's chest tightened and released in the ordinary way people do when the big thing in the distance they've been expecting appears. The gate was down. All was well. He exhaled and counted. The headlight held still in a way headlights do when the track comes straight toward you. The horn did not sound. The wheel thrum came up under the bell like a second, lower bell. He felt it in his feet. The grain hauler's dog stood again, ears up, looking not at the light, but at the gap where the rails disappeared into weeds. The headlight brightened, then dimmed, then brightened in a pattern he could not name, almost like breath, not the even fire of an engine. The lantern held high, a quiet hand in the dark. The bell continued. Patient. Evan found himself counting the spaces between rings and between suggested thumps on the far rail, as if the geometry might answer a question. The horn sounded, finally too long, a short, a long. The whistle for a crossing, familiar, correct. It came from the left and the right at the same time, as if the river held it and answered it. The headlight did not grow as fast as it should have for the sound. For an ordinary moment stretched thin, it was both near and not. He did nothing. He held his brake and did nothing, which is the job. The headlight resolved into a bright blot behind fog that wasn't there a minute ago. The light passed. Nothing passed. The air moved. The rails sang like strings briefly, the way rails sing when weight leaves them. The red lights blinked twice more in stubborn rhythm, and then cut out. The bell stuttered into silence. The arms rose as if remembering how. Evan did not move for 3 heartbeats he would later pretend he hadn't counted. The grain hauler did the same. The lantern lowered, then tipped once. A thank you to the trucks. Absurd and perfectly right. Evan rolled very slowly, scanned left, scanned right. The rails were rails. The night was night. He crossed. On the far side, he pulled just past the gate with room for the grain hauler to do the same, and let the other driver's rig clear the planks before settling his foot. The grain hauler's window slid down. The other driver leaned out. He was younger than Evan by a decade, and wore the kind of cap that knew weather. "You see it?" he asked, not breathless, just needing a check. "I saw what the crossing wanted me to see," Evan said, and surprised himself a little by how that sounded. They sat there a second, not side by side so much as connected by the idea of the rails between them. The woman from the railroad called back. "Sir?" "Our maintainer is on scene now. He's reporting a false activation on your crossing, and one down by the trestle. Crew is clearing brush off the approach. We apologize for the delay. Thank you for waiting." "Copy," Evan said. He watched her words move into the air and join other words, old ones, maybe from other nights. Lights dropped, arms up. "We're through. Safe travels," she said. Her voice lifted on the last syllable, as if letting the call go with a small, clean bow. They pulled away like people leave porches. The road after the crossing fell under the truck in long, easy sheets. The river slid a little closer, and then away again. In a mile, a low trestle presented itself, chain-link fence guarding the sides, a sign with the curious confidence of old departments. "Report Rue Crossing." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "Use care in fog." The fog at the river lay well behaved, a carpet that stopped at a certain edge as if someone had drawn a line and said yes here, no there. Evan eased across with the care that had seemed unnecessary before, and now seemed like the only speed a person should ever use. The timbers under the tires answered with their polite hollow sound. On the far side, a pickup with a yellow magnetic beacon stuck to its roof sat half on the shoulder. 2 men in vests, heads together by a signal bungalow, straightened as the truck moved past. One lifted a hand. The beacon on the roof did not flash. The lantern by his knee did, briefly, as if catching the headlight and considering it. Past the trestle, the road widened, the little town let go, and a big road took over, the kind that tells a person the next hour will have very few surprises if they let it. Evan settled the rig into the right lane and listened as quiet got larger again. At a truck stop a county over, he pulled in for fuel and a cup that would last him through the long rank of billboards. Diesel clattered in the chill. Hoses sang. Receipts printed with the same slow patience. A lattice dropped snow. Inside, a bulletin board by the coffee machine held a card with a blue border. "Report a grade crossing incident," it read. In the corner, a smaller typed note. "Wait it out. Call the number. Don't test arms." From someone who has had their share of nights. At the counter, a man with reflective tape on his jacket sleeves stood stirring sugar into thick coffee. The sleeve bore a patch with a railroad's name Evan didn't know anymore, the kind that had merged into bigger names and then into new ones. The man pushed an extra packet toward him without looking up, the default generosity of people who work nights. "Trestle fog again?" he asked, as if guessing the month. Evan nodded. "Crossing held me back." "Good crossing," the man said. No smile, but no irony. He gestured toward the window with the sugar packet. "They hail me out there sometimes when the old circuits breathe wrong. Always better to let the place have its say, and then go. Everyone goes home that way." He folded the sugar packet once, twice, and put it in his pocket instead of using it. "You take care." Back in the cab, the night pressed its cool palm to the glass and let go. Evan sipped coffee and felt his hands let the wheel do what it had been doing for hours. He passed a siding where a short train sat quiet, 2 locomotives asleep, a handful of covered hoppers, A caboose used now as an office. A lantern hung in the caboose cupola window. It glowed the way painted glass glows when something warm is behind it. It did not move. He kept driving. The road angled away from the river. The fields returned to their private business. Far ahead, the gentle seesaw of red taillights drew a line he could join or not join as he liked. He did. The crossing's rhythm weirdly stayed with him, not as something he could hum, not even as sound, but as a feeling of right timing, the way you know when to speak and when to let the silence answer. An hour later, on a straight stretch with no lights and only his own shadow stitching on the road, he thought about the lantern by the cabinets and the way the bell changed by a breath, and the way the headlight was and wasn't, and how a person can sit across from something that doesn't insist on being explained and be fine with it. He didn't change the radio station. He didn't narrate it to the log. He just kept pace with the steady things. The rails behind him were someone else's concern now, and whoever tended them by phone, by tool, by habit, by lantern had done enough. He set his cruise for a speed that made every sign feel honest. The road answered with the low song it gives when a driver has made himself the right size for it. And the night, generous and patient, did not offer any more tests. Story number 8. The high plane carried the interstate like a taut string, and the stars sat on it as if weightless. Jenna had been running east since dusk, the sensei in a desk, kind of steady, no-drama stretch that makes a driver trust her own breathing. The rig liked this air dry, cool, thin enough to make the turbo sing a little sweeter. To the north, broken mesas made black teeth against the sky. To the south, there was nothing but the suggestion of low land falling away for miles. The dash lights were dimmed, so her eyes could keep their full share of night. She had a simple plan. Hold an honest pace. Keep the trailer's temperature in its lane, and stop at Antelope Springs, a one-exit wonder with pumps, showers, and a diner that served breakfast, no matter what the clock said. It was a landmark as much as a fuel stop. She liked the way the place made room for drivers. She liked the old map on the wall with pins for cities no longer important, and the clerk who had been there long enough to know the names of dogs. The first blue sign for it showed up exactly where it always did in her mind. Services 76 miles, Ant Springs Exit 232. She made the math quietly and was satisfied. She had half a tank and spare, but she kept to the plan anyway. The habit of stopping at that particular place settled her. Some stretches prefer rituals. Night pressed its smooth hand over everything. Wind farms to the far east moved their blades slowly, a steady syntax in the dark. Fence posts ticked by like punctuation marks. She passed a ranch driveway with 2 stones and a gate hung from a heavy post. A dog barked once, not an alarm, but because that's how a dog keeps time with the world at night. She rolled past mile 156, then 157, the little green plates catching her headlight briefly and slipping away as if reassured. The road climbed in a long, lazy way. The truck took it with a patient pull. She sipped from a thermos that kept the coffee honest instead of heroic. At mile 160, the next services sign appeared again. Services 84 miles, Ant Springs Exit 232. She frowned without meaning to. Maybe she had read it wrong the first time. Maybe she had let the mind do its trick where numbers blur into other numbers. She checked the trip. The mileage was what it should be. She let the sign go. Signs can be replaced out of sequence. A new one can arrive before an old one has been taken down. The night plays with distance anyway. The radio drifted to an AM station carrying old songs at a volume that kept the cab human. The bass line lay against the tires and made a friendly weave. She passed 2 trucks, stopped side by side at a wide turnout, their marker lights stitched like careful embroidery. One of the drivers had a hood up in a way that suggested conversation rather than emergency. A third truck rolled by in the left lane with a sound that meant weight and good bearings. More miles. The next blue sign blinked out of the dark at mile 165. Services 91 miles. Ant Springs Exit 232. She spoke aloud, surprising herself with the tone calm, curious, almost entertained. "You're doing a bit there, aren't you?" She checked the fuel again and did the math again. She would be fine for 100 miles 3 times over. Still, Something in the back of her mind set a small brass weight on a shelf. The road took a bend that felt like straightness taught to dance. Ahead, a lumbering shape of night on the right side of the road turned out to be a herd of pronghorn beyond the fence line, heads lifting and lowering as if testing a silent metronome. Their eyes did not glow in her light. They watched with the kind of attention that does not announce itself. She lifted off a hair and let them fade back into their own business. The next sign had no humor in it at all. Road work ahead. New alignment. Reduced speed. A second sign followed, a rectangle full of nice confidence. Expect changed conditions. Half the cones sat where they were told, the other half leaned presently, arguing with the wind. The lanes necked down not to 1 but to something like 1 8/10. The thrust of a bridge loomed ahead, the kind of long modern flyover that takes an interstate over another, as if folding a ribbon without creasing it. She stayed in the right lane, the one the cones let her have, and let the posted speed be the posted speed. The flyover came on. It was new enough to still smell like chalk and steel. The old alignment ran below like a quiet river, its reflectors soft with age. For 3 seconds she was between the two, and they were both the same road, only in different years. Her mirrors took both into their small squares, and then returned to this year alone. Green overhead panels hung just after the bridge, fresh and bright as a spring baseball field. Exit 232 Ant. Springs 2 miles. The mile marker at the shoulder read 171. She nodded once to no one, and felt the plan settle back into place. The odd humor of the blue signs could be a clerical joke. She could laugh along. Antelope Springs would be where it had always been, at 232, a small island under lights. At 172, a blue sign announced, services 103 miles and Springs exit. 232. A length of tape covered a corner, not neatly, the way someone might stick a finger on a page in a breeze. She considered the sign the way a driver considers an older stray dog hanging around a station it belonged in the picture, but its name tag was wrong. Her phone had been in airplane mode through the long cuts between towers. She tapped it out of courtesy to see if the DOT map would reassure her. Bars appeared, very polite, then vanished as the phone made up its mind. When they came back, GPS resolved to a bright arrow on a line that did not match the asphalt quite. The DOT overlay showed a dotted swath where a future alignment would splice in. Maybe future had arrived faster than the app. Maybe tomorrow the layer would be corrected, and tonight was the seam between. A little further, something else altered. Mile markers ticked up predictable as rain through a morning storm. 173, 174, 175, and then, at the next shoulder, 169. She thought she had missed one at speed, but then 170 followed where 176 should have been. She made the math slowly and felt the odd little drop in the stomach that comes when a pattern a person didn't know they were using rearranges itself politely without permission. A new alignment can make a mile count change. Agencies reset, renumber, reconcile. They do it at 3 in the morning because fewer of us mind it then. It set her nerves into a small, unnecessary, but present alert that felt like the body's version of reaching to straighten a picture on a wall. She settled into the fact of it. The next green panel overhead didn't bother with miles. Simply, exit 232. Ant. Springs next right. The arrow was clear. The sign's reflective coat was new enough to be devout. She drifted into the right lane early and checked her mirrors with the careful courtesy of someone pulling a sleeping child's blanket up. The trailer rolled behind her like something that understood. The ramp rose elegantly off the main line. She took it with less brake than she would have expected, more gravity doing its share. Halfway down, the world divided in a way ramps sometimes do. The immediate down to the gas and the trucks to the right, the car wash and a motel to the left. She put the rig where the lines told her a rig should go. The lot opened up, clean rectangles of concrete under sodium lamps, the travel plaza's neon humming its modest hum. It was exactly as it had always been, which is one of the ways places keep drivers alive. She fueled at a pump with a worn keypad and a stubborn receipt slot. The wind leaned on the cab and then let it be. A trickle of cars moved through with the calm of late night. A couple of other rigs sat down the lot under their own light, refrigerators murmuring a lulling chorus. When the nozzle clicked final and honest, She stowed hose and cap and moved forward to let someone else have the head. She parked at the edge where the lights give up a little and the stars get their share back. Inside, the diner's clock still wore the yellow hand that the day shift uses to send the night shift silent messages about the griddle. The map on the wall, the one she loved, with routes replaced and restored, had a new set of red pushpins down the spine of her route. A small typed slip at the bottom, stapled on crooked red. New Interstate Almond opened MM 165, 176. Old alignment now 279, 290 recycled mile numbers. See desk for details. The clerk looked up and smiled as if he'd been waiting specifically for her kind of question all evening. He wore his name clipped, crooked, and a flannel that had learned the shape of its work. "You heard about the Miles fighting each other yet?" he asked, before she asked anything. "I met the argument halfway up," she said. "My signs were playing a game counts as a riddle. Couple crews wore themselves out today trying to make 3 agencies happy," he said. "Some mile markers came with the new, some they haven't picked up from the old. Some blue service boards got put up by the contractor, who didn't know the other contractor had already ordered new ones with a different number set. You're in Antelope Springs all the same." He slid a paper across the counter with the authoritative weight of a handout earned by confusion. Temporary mile overlay. White tags on green stakes. "They'll fix it next week. Or the one after." She smiled, felt her small animal of worry climb off its chair and curl in a patch of sun that existed only in her head. "I like the old mile numbers," she said. "They were housebroken." "We'll housebreak the new ones," he said, and it sounded like he meant it. "You want pancakes or one of those odd little sandwiches drivers pretend is lunch?" She ate in the long window that faced the lot, where the rigs looked like housing for a giant's pets. Pancakes arrived crisped at the edges, the way someone who cares a little extra will crisp them. Butter turned into rivers. Syrup improved the map of the night. A man 2 stools down sat with his back to the room and wrote small, neat numbers in a ledger with a mechanical pencil, clicking gently when the lead needed help. The radio over the pies played a station from a city in another state, the voice far away but working hard to be present. When she paid, the clerk slid another paper forward, as if he'd been waiting for the chance. "A guy from DOT dropped this for night runners. He asked me to make sure it keeps moving until they figure out the punch list." The sheet read, "If exit 230, 2 sings, list a distance that doesn't make sense. You are still right. Follow ground truth." The bullet points were boring, which made them essential. Back in the cab heater reminded the night that it could be kind. She wrote one line on her own small index card clipped to the dash where she kept temporary truths. "Ground truth is the thing under the tires." She let her head rest briefly against the wheel, not tired, just letting the last half hour put its weight down in the right place inside her. She rolled back to the on-ramp. The sign at the merge announced MM 176, as if in crisp, new handwriting. 30 seconds past the merge, the shoulder post gave her 170 again, stubbornly. She almost laughed. The sky liked the game. It learned a paler shade of black at the edge to the east. The weirdness didn't demand more. It offered small exercises instead. A blue services 62 miles that she knew for a fact was 30 off. A portable message board flashed slow for workers' night shift that blinked to dark as she approached and had no crew to justify it. A white on green that read exit 232 amperes, where no A had ever lived. The A had black tape over it when she checked her mirror. She let the road present its tests and answered each with the obvious correction. Her eyes, her hands, the identical logic of tires on pavement. Past the long bents of the new flyover, a little flash of reflective down in the median caught her attention. She eased a hair and saw a cluster of stacked old mile markers laid on their sides like books in a library a patient person would fix tomorrow. The numbers on their faces were the ones she remembered. The metal had the scuffs of weather and plow. Somebody had written in paint pen across the top one, "Back soon." Below it, in smaller hand, an arrow, and, maybe as a note for themselves or as a joke, maybe not. The thought made her feel companioned by the place itself, the way a person feels accompanied by an honest wind. At 3 a.m., the world likes to be funny in ways no one laughs at. She let herself smile and watched the shoulder for wildlife. 2 jackrabbits decided to make a game of running parallel to the truck. They won their game and vanished back into their own purposes. She thought about other times roads had behaved like they were deciding who they were going to be. Temporary crossovers where a new lane takes you into the old lane story. Detours that thread a person through someone else's backyard. The slow death of a frontage road that used to be the main thing. The country kept growing and changing while she slept and drove. She had spent years riding those seams. On nights like this, a seam pulled and a sign got ahead of itself before someone with a ladder and a bright vest and a thermos and a sense of humor corrected it. Ahead, a dynamic message board glowed orange against the sky's slow change. It read, New alignment MM 165, 176. Expect changed conditions. Under that, a second line scrolled with reassurance in proudly all caps. You are on the right road. It was dangerously close to sentiment, which made it perfect. She saw a maintenance truck parked in the gore beyond the sign, lights off, someone inside taking a sip of coffee, head tilted back against the seat. They had likely argued with numbers all day and would be up before she was again to make sure number and ground learned to be a pair. She kept the pace that keeps a truck gentle. The new alignment smoothed her path over a shallow arroyo on a neat bridge that didn't exist last week. Below, in that dark channel, the old road lay like a line in a palimpsest. A trio of cattle moved along its fence in the near dark, hooves making soft decisions each in their turn. By mile marker 183, she trusted it just enough to call it that a coyote loped across 2 lanes of America with the confidence of a creature whose ancestors had solved every map in their favor. She lifted off the throttle a breath, then took her pace back, watching him vanish into time. The blue services signs calmed down. The numbers started behaving. The next one told her an honest 36. The one after offered a breakfast stop that did not exist, except in the memory of the man who had once owned the land there and hung a coffee cup on a fence post like a flag. She drove past the ghost of it the way a person walks past a store that used to have an interesting window. Dawn found the world gradually. The way good things find people, no fanfare. Just a sharpened outline here, a warmer edge there. The green of the mile markers became something like hope-colored instead of secret. The pronghorn from earlier might be bedded near a fence post, she thought, watching the light find the tips of grass that had not looked like anything but dark lines half an hour ago. At the county line, a roadside crew had set up where the new and old met. 2 men in vests joked with a third, who stood on the bed of a pickup, sliding a green panel into place with practiced hands. A woman at the base sorted through the hardware with the relieved efficiency of someone who knows what every bolt is for. The portable board nearby had been changed to, Thanks for your patience. No, really. The sincerity of it made the whole scene feel like a trick the road and the people together had pulled off for the sake of the next person through. She didn't stop. She didn't need anything. The coffee she'd decided on at Antelope Springs had done right by her. The rig sounded content. The day ahead asked for steady hands, and one good choice at a time. The night had offered her a little puzzle, nothing cruel, just a test of whether she would believe a number over the thing under her tires. She had chosen the ground. The ground had obliged by being ground. When the last of the weird blue signs popped up in her mirror, services 118 miles, then the next one brilliantly correct at 12, she let it slide into the past. She wouldn't collect this as a story to trot out at countertalk. She would keep it small and accurate, a quiet chord in the memory of 1,000 reasonable miles. If later someone mentioned that the mile markers out by the new flyover had argued with each other like siblings for a whole week, she would nod and say something polite about contractors and the heroic work of people who fix things while the rest sleep. And if, 3 exits later, a temporary little white mileage tag taped to a green post caught the sun just so and threw a last wink at her cab, she didn't need to. I mentioned that either. Some roads like to let drivers know they were paying equal attention. It keeps both parties honest. The sun put a blade on the far horizon. She watched it arrive and did the old habit of saying a small hello in her head. The interstate ahead took the light like a floor takes wax. The numbers on the signs agreed to be themselves again. She kept to her pace and carried the calm of a night that had tried to practice a magic trick and hadn't quite gotten the coordination right. The truck rolled on, certain of the thing it was made to do. Story number 9. Night had flattened the marshland until it looked like a sheet of dark glass. The highway skimmed across it on low causeways and embankments. a ribbon suspended just high enough to stay dry when the wind came up. Lena kept her rig true and let the white lines sweep under. She had a load of lumber wrapped tight in blue tarp and banded like a present. The trailer liked to track. It minded its manners if she minded hers. To both sides, water took the stars and wore them without shame. The air smelled faintly of salt and pine. Her radio sat low, a local AM station putting out a tower's worth of late-night comfort weather, farm prices, an old ballad that knew how to be patient. The heater worked just enough to keep the cab human. Her thermos had a clean edge of coffee left in it. Out here, hours past midnight, she liked how the world went simple. A road, a task, a line she could keep. Past an exit for a town with 2 lights and a feed store. A sign warned of bridge grading ahead. She eased a couple miles off her speed. The truck answered by feeling more like a train than a boat. In the mirror on her passenger side, the big West Coast mirror with the small convex companion, she watched the trailer's marker lights stitched along the side like careful embroidery. They reassured her the way a heartbeat does when the rest of the room is quiet. The mirror changed, not by moving, not by cracking. It changed by what it decided to show her. For a blink, the little convex panel held a picture that was not currently true. The right turn signal in the reflection beat twice, and then steadied to off. She wasn't signaling. Her hand was steady, and the stalk was still. She looked at the dash for the dumb and ordinary. Had she brushed the lever? No. She looked back at the glass, and saw what she always saw. A wedge of lane, the trailer's faithful glow. It was nothing. A trick of eyes that had been awake too long. A flash off water. The bridge grating gave its low song under her tires. When she came off it to real asphalt, she flicked the right turn signal as a test and counted 2 beats. It felt like tapping a shoulder to see if a person was only pretending to sleep. The mirror blinked back at her in time with the dash. She let it go with a small smile. Night invents tiny puzzles to keep drivers awake without being rude. The causeway narrowed where the marsh pressed close. Boardwalks to nowhere appeared and disappeared for birders who would show up at daybreak in hats. Her headlights found the reflectors on the guardrail and set them to shimmering. She checked the mirror again out of habit and saw, with a clarity that made her shoulders rise a half inch, a thing that had not happened yet. A traffic barrel in the right lane, lying on its side, rolling in a slow circle like a coin that can't decide to lie down. It rolled under the shoulder lights of a ramp she had not reached. She checked the forward road. Empty. She tapped the brakes for a breath, just enough to tell the trailer she was thinking. Up ahead, the ramp arrived. Quiet as a thought. And there, at the exact place and angle she had seen it, a barrel had freed itself from its herd during some previous wind and was doing a soft, disorganized dance. It wouldn't have hurt the rig at her pace. It would have scuffed paint and bruised pride. She eased the wheel a steady 2 inches to the left and let it wander into the shadow behind her. She watched it settle in the mirror the way a cat settles once its audience is gone. She didn't wonder about it in the way that pulls threads out of a sweater. She kept the hands where she liked them and let curiosity sit in the cab like a polite third passenger. The mirror had given her a picture. Then the world had matched it. Strange, small, useful. The marsh changed flavors. Cypress replaced reed. Spanish moss hung where it could and didn't argue when the breeze told it stories. The highway widened for a mile and then fell back to itself. In the far distance, a line of orange light sat low over the trees where a refinery made its own weather. She timed her breathing to the rhythm of the pavement joints and checked the mirror again because that's what people do when something begins to misbehave in a helpful way. This time, the mirror held a wrongness so specific and so ordinary that she felt it in her hands rather than her eyes. The right rear marker light on the trailer was dark in the convex circle. In the direct glass, all the markers shone. She looked forward, checked her lane, then looked back again. In the small glass, darkness. In the large, glow. She held the image like a bird and didn't squeeze it. 2 minutes later, a small bump of road where a culvert passed under the causeway let the rig flex, and the dash reflected a wink of red somewhere behind her that didn't line up with the usual. In the main mirror, the marker light went out for half a second and came back. In the convex, it was still out. She rolled into the next turnout, a flat parking apron used by wildlife officers and people with reasons, and stopped where her own headlights could do some good. She set the brake, pulled on a hat without thinking about it, and walked the right side with a gloved hand on the trailer's skin. The lamp in the rear housing had a loose clip. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would be an inspection problem yet. It could have waited until morning, but the mirror had shown it disloyal, and she liked her gear to be loyal. She took the little screwdriver from the kit in the side box and settled the clip with a firm click. The light obeyed. She watched it through one extra breath, then two, then climbed back into the cab with the particular satisfaction of tightening something the universe had not asked her to tighten, but that would make the next hour better. Back on the road, the small passenger mirror had gathered itself into its calm duty. It showed the lane, the lights, the line. She had almost forgotten to look for mischief when it offered another small, precise suggestion. In it, the road's shoulder sign announced a way station open 2 miles ahead. The main glass showed only the shoulder and dark trees. 10 seconds later, the sign came into the real beam. She smiled without meaning to. The mirror was early, that was all. An advanced version of what was already scheduled. At the way station, the overroad reader washed the cab in a soft green and said, "Bypass." She nodded to the empty glass of the booth like a good neighbor and carried on. The night softened and then sharpened with small weather nobody would write down. Near the river, the highway grew a second personality, high-bridged and arched as if learning to be proud. The water lay black and thoughtful under it. She checked her mirror on the approach and saw in the small circle a set of taillights crest the far span and drop, like a rig just ahead of her had taken the grade. There was no rig. The bridge ahead wore only her headlights. She felt the quiet kind of worry reach for her elbow and then let go. She took the rise at her pace and met no one on top. Halfway down, the mirror's prediction resolved. The set of taillights wasn't on the bridge at all. It belonged to a boat under it, a river dredge working at night with a crane arm and disciplined slow movement. The deck lights had bounced against the undersides of the girders and slipped into the convex glass as if the mirror had a polite relationship with water. She let the easy laugh go then. The night is allowed a sense of humor. At a long, lonely interchange where one state road sloped up to kiss the interstate and then fell away again, the mirror offered the strongest piece of advice yet. In it, the right lane curved in a way that the forward view did not. In it, the right-hand barrier closed in tight. The main glass showed wide open black. She checked the dash clock. Out of the odd, the habit a person has when the world asks for a decision and the time feels like a clue. 2:19. No reason in the number. She lifted her foot slight and eased toward the left line. The convex image insisted in its small, patient way. The right lane will leave you for a construction gore that does not announce itself until it has you. When the road rose under the next high-sodium lamp, the cones appeared blown, sprawled, half doing their job. The right lane kneed off into the gore, and a missing arrow board waited at the dark end like a host who had fallen asleep before opening the door. If she had been half a beat quicker, she would have dropped into it and then had to claw her way back out. She nodded to no one and moved through the left lane like it had been set aside for her. She thought briefly, not unkindly, of an aunt who used to say, "If the world is going to tap your shoulder, at least turn your head." She turned it when the mirror tapped and found the place in the lane where the wheel wanted to be. The truck rewarded good behavior by staying ordinary. At the next turnout, a proper rest area with 1 building and 6 light poles and a sod-soft lawn rolled out like felt. She stopped for 10 minutes to let the kettle go back on the boil. The building, brick and square and tidy, threw its warmth into the big room with the vending machines, the way small towns throw potlucks. She poured hot water into a fresh sachet, watched steam rise in the shape of errands, and stood by the window looking at her own truck like it was a picture on a calendar. A maintenance man in a safety vest pushed a quiet floor machine down the hallway, his expression the practiced neutrality of a person at work, caught up in the exact business he wanted to be caught up in. Outside, a state map behind glass had a small white sticker on it with black letters, "You are here somewhere between." Next to it, a bulletin pinned in that special purple of copy toner asked folks to watch for deer. Someone had added, in pen, "and for each other," and drawn a small heart they had been embarrassed to draw, because it was very small. Back in the cab, she watched the mirror the way a person watches a kettle about to boil. It showed only what it ought to. She eased onto the on-ramp and let the rig fall into speed like settling into a familiar bed. The highway rolled out, straight and reasonable. In the small glass, a shape formed that didn't belong yet, a slow-moving flatbed in the right lane up ahead, hazard lights mild, carrying rebar tall enough to shift its silhouette, a flag on the trailing ends that lifted and fell. There was no flatbed in front of her. The road was true and empty. She moved one lane left without drama and held. A mile later, beyond a low spot in the marsh, where mist had gathered just for texture, the actual flatbed slid into existence, exactly where the mirror had drawn it. It ran 20 miles slower than the flow, doing nothing wrong. Its driver checked his mirrors in a steady way. His truck wore the ghost of dust from a day spent not worrying what drivers behind might think. She let him be, and passed with a good margin, lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in the old trucker salute, and watched him return it without looking up. The mirror had one more piece of its strange courtesy left. Outside the last causeway, where pine took control back from water, and the road found real shoulders again, the convex circle held the briefest sketch of a deer in the grass at the edge. Not the chrome-eyed glare people fear, just the posture of a body about to step into a thought. In the forward world, nothing moved. She slowed a stitch, one breath won or lost wouldn't change a thing, and watched. The deer arrived into the headlight splash as if it had been called. It took 2 brisk steps and stopped dead at the lane, made up its mind to value its own life, and turned back. The mirror had overpredicted by a second, which made her like it better. Ambition is forgivable when it tries to keep you safe. The road tilted inland, then inland again. Ahead, a tall water tower in a small town wore the town's name in blocky letters. The mirror in its frame had been alive for an hour, and now it settled. It gave her ordinary truths. It reflected only what was. She waited for the odd shift, and did not get one. Dawn, uncertain, touched the hard corners of distant buildings and softened them. Her hands stayed light on the wheel. At a truck stop that advertised biscuits in letters so confident they might have shaken hands, she pulled in for fuel and daylight. The glass door had a flyer for a mobile glass company, cartoon mirror smiling back, a number for chip repair. An old man with a name patch that said Chandler sat on a stool behind a counter, alert as a barn cat. He was telling the clerk in a tone that suggested this was a story he told often, but still liked that he could fix a loose mirror frame with nothing but patience and a loop of fishing line. She didn't need a repair. She didn't stop to make small talk. She tucked away the name all the same. The rest of the day would be simple. A city that liked to stack its traffic on ramps like a game, a drop at a yard that paid its invoices on time, a nap in the shade of her own cab with the hush of refrigerated units all around. She would not mention the mirror to the receiving clerk. She would not call the radio to submit it as a weirdness. It was small, specific, useful. The road had tapped her shoulder and for once, had done it kindly. She walked her post-trip in sunlight that made the trailer's blue tarp look like a lake. The marker light she had snugged shone the same as its brothers. She laid her hand on the trailer's corner and felt the small hum of a machine that had behaved all the ways she asked it to. When she climbed back up, the mirror caught her face for a second and gave it back without commentary. She liked that best. The ordinary returned. Out on the highway, the marsh waited for night to make it level again. The mirror would do what mirrors do. If another hour came when it decided to be early on her behalf, she would accept the favor and not interrogate it. Some stretch of road out there between Salt and Pine wanted her to get where she was going, almost as if the place itself claimed a share of her good sense. She gave it credit, kept her speed honest, and went on. And now the road falls silent. The engines rest, the echoes fade, and the night stretches on quiet and endless. These 9 stories linger like the glow of taillights disappearing into the dark, reminders that even silence has its own voice on the highway. Thank you for staying until the very end. If you're new, subscribe to our channel so you never miss what waits beyond the next mile. And like our video, your like motivates us to keep bringing you more nights on the road. Now let the hum of the night settle in, close your eyes, and drift into rest. Good night.